Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, have you ever felt like, because there must have been like more pressure on you because you're kind of the oldest, right,
Yeah.
in your family,
Yeah.
and you have siblings that have to look up to you. Um, has that ever played in a role, like how you present yourself or how you go about, especially to them, because I feel like kids, they're like sponges and they copy and kind of
Yeah.
react to what you do. Did that affect you in any way?
I mean, I just remember always being the guinea pig and always being in trouble because I always did everything wrong.
Yeah.
And I just always remember being frustrated because my brother and sister got away with a lot more. But I think, too, I just also got used to being the scapegoat for everything. So even when people would get in trouble in my family, they'd just blame it on me. And I got so used to just getting in trouble or getting my ass whooped that I just said, yeah, just blame it on me. I would even tell people it's not a big deal because I almost like preconditioned myself to just always be in trouble.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was like a weird, not sadistic in any way, shape, or form. It's just I kind of had accepted my fate that
That's
I
crazy.
was always the one that would take the blame for things. You are the oldest, are you?
Um, I have a, my daddy had multiple wives, so I'm the oldest through my true blood sister, but I'm the second oldest, so
Got it.
not the first.
Got it. Yeah. Yeah, being the oldest, there's a lot more pressure. You got to do things right.
Yeah.
Everyone's looking at you, and then if
Isn't
you
that
mess
weird
up,
that you just accept it? Because I felt the exact same way. I was kind of always like the black sheep of my family, where
yeah,
like they were so stuck together, like as a group, and I was just like, oh, I want to go do this, I want to go do that. But when it came to discipline, I was always getting in trouble. And I kind of just accepted it. I was just like, oh, they're all gonna blame me. Oh well.
yeah,
And I think that's why maybe I made a game of it. I was just like, oh yeah, try to spank me. Oh, you missed, right?
yeah,
Um, yeah, that's crazy.
yeah,
Yeah, it just shows like how like powerful like the mind is truly. Just it's like in those moments, like personal experience as well. It's like you turn it into a game, or if like when you're in those situations, because you're just trying to survive, and this is your normal. So if it's always going to happen, and like even you being the scapegoat for all the time, it's like if you don't normalize it, and if it's not a thing, then you're constantly going through that trauma, if you will. But if you normalize it, you just repress it, the mind puts it off, and you don't realize things until you're out of that social context where we're no longer getting blamed for our sibling stuff. Now we're in the real world, and but
yeah,
you're still having some of those things, and then that's actually when the trauma usually comes out.
yeah. What about you? What are some things that you've been through?
Um, a lot of my stuff, I didn't know this actually until I went to Sacred Sons, deep processing, went through all this stuff. I used to always think that a lot of like my anger or like this constant like not feeling good enough used to come from my dad. Still a lot of it came from him. I'm not fully writing him off, but it was actually from an abandonment when I was young for my mom, my real mom. My grandma, she raised me and everything. Thank God she taught me all the good morals and values that I hold today, very near and dear. But I replaced my real mom with my grandma, and I didn't realize until literally last year that I did this. I was trying to fill a void externally. Like there's something difference between your real mom, like your blood. Like there's a connection there you can never replicate, even if you have the most amazing, you know, grandma, if you will, that's raising you. So mine was, I think it was something like 12 to 15 years of just like abandonment from when I was born and stuff like that. She always like pawned me off to my grandma to raise me and stuff. And once again, at the time when I was little, I just thought it was normal. Okay, we're going to grandma's house, and my dad, he's always away at work, similar to your father. And I just kind of took this as the normal. And then my brother told me a couple stories 3 or 4 years ago. He's like, yeah, he's like, do you remember when we were like 5 or 6 years old, how when your mom would watch us, his mom was different than mine, that
Yeah,
we always had to stay outside during the daytime. And then when my dad came home, she would let us inside, kind of like animals. So every day, by the time we woke up, when we weren't in school, like on the weekends or during summer, was always, and this is why I grew up outdoors. I thought it was fun because I was 5 years old and I didn't know any better to play in the woods. We had a lot of land at the time. But my thing was, she locked us outside. She didn't want to deal with us during the day because she was going through a lot of her own mental issues. I didn't learn this until much later on and like really reflecting on it, some things between her and my dad. But going through, like, I mean, we were outside for 12 hours a day When the sun came up, she'd feed us a breakfast. We would go outside. We're playing in the woods, doing with the dogs, whatever we did just when we were little. We'd eat lunch outside, and then the only time she'd allow us in is to use the restroom, and then when our dad came home. And I was like, all right, we're playing outside. And this went on for, years, I think, until they got a divorce at from age 5 to 9, literally just outside, not allowed inside. So I didn't realize that till later on. I thought it was a fun game. My brother, he was about 4 years older than me, so he was 9. So he understood the situation a little bit more. And then going into some of my,
But he was still a kid.
Yeah, he was still just a kid. He knew a little bit more because he was 9, but I thought it was more fun in games. I liked being outside, but he was more inside. He liked to play video games and stuff, so it was a lot different trauma for him.
Got it.
But I didn't realize, and this actually bled into my adult life, of this constantly feeling the alone, or wanting. One of the big processes I went through was this needing to be seen or to be found, actually, because I was always out. A lot of those days I was just alone. You're out in the middle of the woods, playing in the tree, climbing on trees and stuff. That's my main thing. I loved to climb when I was little. But I had this constant need and this deep down feeling of I needed to be found. I wanted someone to find me in the tree and bring me inside, or I wanted the friend to come up. So I spent the majority, my first 18 years of life, just always alone, if you will, until, I moved out to California. It changed a little bit when I got older. But my biggest thing was the abandonment, and then the constant not being good enough for my dad type thing. And then the first time I think he ever really started paying attention to me was middle school. I was usually when you're, in my experience, the alone and never feeling good enough to your parents, I took it out as an anger, if you will. So when I first got into middle school, I was already a little larger than everybody. And I didn't get into fights due to I wanted to hurt somebody. It was more of a fun game, you challenge somebody else, kind of the more primal stuff.
Yeah.
But in a normal culture, fighting is not okay. And I was almost expelled from school because I got suspended so many times in 1 year. When I was 12 years old is when this started going on. But on those days when I would get suspended, my dad would have to pick me up at the principal's office. There'd be this whole thing, and that was the most interaction I got from him when I was young. So it turned into hey, what did I do this time? And he would kind of joke about it too, oh, what'd you do today? And but we'd have an hour ride, car ride home, and he would share all these insights as a super bonding moment. So looking back on it now, I was actually doing this for fun, but also trying to reach out, crying for attention. It wasn't actually that I wanted to be violent. I was doing it for sport and wanting the need and that attention from my dad. And then going to the next phase, the outlet I created was sports, particularly track and football was my main 2 outlets. A lifesaver. I'd have been up in jail or at least expelled from all the public schools if I didn't have those 2 things, because it's just a very violent time when I was younger. But all of my insecurities and fears, I suffered some of the similar, like you said.
Were you being violent because you wanted attention?
Mine was actually twofold. So I wasn't actually being the bully. I was actually being the protector, because I wanted someone. I always related to the ancient warriors and stuff. When I was Sacred Sons, and dove into a little bit more deep, but always related to that protector and the ancient warrior, if you will. So I was more the sheepdog of the group. If I saw somebody else getting bullied, I'm oh, this guy thinks he's fun. He thinks he's violent. He's gonna hurt this kid. Okay, well, I'll step in. I'll fight you just for the fun of it, because I wanted to protect somebody. So I was always the intermediary, if you will. And but I wasn't actually the attention was one thing, but I was also I wanted someone to protect me when I was young, and I wanted someone to be there for me. So I feel I was expressing that in those fights and stuff, sticking up for other kids.
Gotcha. Interesting.
Yeah. And then going into the football realm after that, that was actually another thing. Truly loved the game. Everything about it is the physical drive that I needed to, go back to the warrior trait, if you will. It's the only time I've ever felt truly whole in my life is when you're in that massive brotherhood. You're getting the physical exertion every day, and you're training to the highest of your ability. And also, once again, it's not fun, but when you enforce your physical will on somebody, it's a whole different feeling, in a competition thing, and I can never replace that feeling. But as once again, it was the only time that in my eyes, my dad would ever look at me and or give me that acknowledgement of hey, you. But at the same time, I was never good enough in a lot of ways. So he was always disappointment or never giving me that validation. So I used to seek external validation because I was like a little boy inside crying that wanted to be found in the woods, but on the outside I was this massive steroid-lifting football player that was hurting people, you know. But it's that inner boy that was broken on the inside, and it was protected at the time in this massive shell that just wanted to be like a physical monster for the longest time.
Gotcha. How interesting. Okay. So I guess with all that, it's just so interesting to like have these conversations now on the other side of my travels, because I think you understand a lot of the reasons now why you act the way that you do, and I think even from the last time that we recorded the podcast and this conversation, I think too you understand some things better. Or my interpretation is I feel that you understand some things better after listening to a lot of the stuff that I expressed.
Yeah, because I think, you know, after talking to you, like I try to sit down and like think about it. And I think the first thing that I noticed is like it was more like physical traumas that hit me first, because that was like the most impactful that I could remember just from my memory. And then, you know, diving a little bit deeper, I started, you know, to remember those emotional traumas that I had. Yeah. And so, yeah, and I don't think I would have ever even thought about it unless we had these conversations, because it never comes up. It's like, when do you talk about this with friends, you know, because I wasn't experiencing anything in my life that was bringing me to a breaking point where I had to be like, hey man, I need to check myself, or like I need to bring myself back. And so I never even thought about it, you know. And then listening to your whole trip and what you've been going through, and it was kind of shocking because at the same time, you know, we had no idea you were going through any of this, you know.
Yeah.
And it's like we would see you in those settings, and it's just, you know, but you know, it's good to hear this, and you know, I'm glad we are talking about it, you know.
Yeah, and I'm glad that we're talking about it too, and I hope that the insights that that I shared, you know, help you or help anybody, right? But at the same time, just it's really nice to hear now that we've had this second conversation. I can see that you've seen things from different perspectives. And so I can tell just even from the two of us talking that it's helped you in some way, which is amazing, because at the end of the day, it's just like if you can affect one person's life, I think that's important in life. Yeah. And yeah, so get back to where we were at in the story. So we were in Convergence, and I'm just going to show a couple photos because I'm kind of going to move past Convergence to the next step, but I already showed you guys what it looked like. So this was a picture of just like the opening ceremonies. And so the opening ceremonies, as you can see here, it's like 333 men. It's a lot of guys. I've never been around that much men ever in my entire life. And just being in that kind of energy was a very special experience. And I just remembered being at this event. I'm like, what the hell did I just walk into right now? Like, what is going on here? What is happening? This is very strange, very different. But like I said, everyone there is there for a specific reason and to help heal and to work on themselves. So it was a very special feeling. And this is a video of like them warming up. This wasn't the actual fighting of the event though. But
this is like capoeira, huh?
Yeah, the capoeira. They were just like, this was more like just like a celebration, and they were just having some fun, which was really cool. Yeah, and this was like the setting. It was beautiful, just like in the forest, which was super rad. Yeah. But that was just like the warm-ups. And I don't want to show the actual fights because that's other people's stories and it's not my story to share. But people can box or they would wrestle like jiu-jitsu. And it was not for the sake of winning or for the sake of losing. It's just for the sake of being in there and meeting another man like eye to eye and testing each other and not to hurt the other person or to knock them out, but just to be there face to face and to confront them. And as a man gives you his fullest self, you can then come forward and give your fullest self. And for some people, right, the fullest version of what they're willing to come forward is they want to fight at 40%. For other men, it's they want to go full 100% and they want to duke it out. And there's like, it's an edge. And some men through going through this, they have a process in front of everybody, and it's very emotional for them because some men have never been hit in the face before, or some men, you know, they like to get angry, or they're worried about their inner beast coming out and they'll hurt somebody, and they have to learn to control themselves. And there's just so many levels to sacred combat, and it's really high energy. Everyone's super excited, jumping around like little kids.
I bet you got the drums going.
It's the most like primal and exhilarating thing you'll ever experience. And to just dive a little bit deeper too, the most interesting thing about the sacred combat is stepping into the arena. You don't necessarily even choose the person you're going to have the combat with.
Yeah.
You just walk in and you meet somebody, and somehow, mysterious way, it works out like this, but it's exactly what you needed in that given thing, and you were meant to, like you said, fight the person, if you will, to heal them through their traumas. And if you've already have experience, you can meet them at a higher level, and you're meeting the individual exactly where they need to be. If they're 70%, you're 70%. And if they want to go all out,
Yeah.
to meet someone on the same level where you're at and or where they...
Beautiful river here. And just to kind of show you the setting, just absolutely gorgeous. And they had this opening ceremony where they like walked us down, and then we like did like an opening ceremony. And it's funny, I know we talked about this last time, but it's something that I realized I had a huge insecurity about. A lot of the guys, they're completely comfortable with getting in the water naked, and for me, I know that was like a huge edge. But it's a bunch of men, we're all there together, there's no sexuality or anything like that behind it. But I know, like, just from my youth and, like, my experiences, like, I have body shame against myself, and I'm insecure about the way my body looks sometimes. And just being able to even, like, get in the water, like, there was also no pressure to get naked. You didn't have to if you wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
But just seeing that some men were comfortable with getting naked in the water, and me, myself, being really uncomfortable with that, just realizing that I had a lot of shame with myself about it. And, you know, little things like this, just, you know, going through all these events and going to all these things, just realizing things about myself and who I am. And so that was like just one thing I did realize from that initial part. And so we go through the Maui Prime weekend, and I knew the reason I was there. I started to understand that my trauma, a lot of it dealt with my mother and the intensity that related to how she raised me as an individual. And one specific aspect was how controlling and intense she was with me my entire life. And so what I will say is the way that my mom and I communicated my entire life was we yelled and cussed each other out. That's just how we spoke to each other. We yelled, we screamed, we did not have normal conversations. We were always fighting. I remember I always used to joke that if I didn't fight with my mom today, something was wrong or the world was going to end. This was something I regularly thought on a regular basis. And the way we talked to each other was just loud and screaming. And you guys have known me, and I guess I'll just ask, like, do you guys ever see me scream or yell, like actually get angry or get pissed off?
I've seen you a couple times.
A couple times?
Yeah, but that was my fault.
There's the context.
It was all me, and it was worth it.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. When you stole my vape, I think.
Yep.
Yeah, so
I didn't steal it for the record.
Yeah, that's fair. Blame it on Justin. But in typical life, I don't usually feel like I get that angry. But when it came to communicating with my family, the only way we communicate is we yelled at each other. And it didn't, I'm not saying we don't love each other, but that's just how we spoke to each other, was just a lot of yelling and a lot of anger, and that's just how we talked to each other.
Were you just like yelling, like arguing, or you were just like yelling, just
yelling, arguing? Like when we talked to each other, everything always turned into a fight. It just, there was never like times when I hung out where like everything just turned into an argument and then would lead to a fight, and then there was yelling. And that's just how we spoke most of the time. And so, you know, I think a lot of it came from like resentment to my mom. Like I held resentment against her because I always felt like she was controlling all aspects of my life. She was always telling me what to do. I was never good enough because I never got like the grades or whatever, did the things the way she wanted to. So I always just felt this intensity with my mom. And so we were doing an activity during one of the sessions, and the activity was yelling and like tapping into your anger. And so, there's a difference between like tapping into your violence or tapping into your anger. It's like, as men, we should be able to tap into those parts of us that allow us to protect others, to be strong, to tap into that anger if we want to, not, I feel that there's no such thing as good emotions and bad emotions. They're just emotions. Anger is an emotion. It's showing you something. You need to feel it. You need to express it, right? Sadness is an emotion. Happiness. All of these things are emotions, and there's no ranking of good or bad. They are just emotions that need to flow through you as an individual. And so for me, I was always taught to never be angry and to never tap into that anger or to never really express myself in that way. And the only times I ever really expressed my anger was with my family when we'd be yelling at each other. And so yelling in this scenario where we were told to tap into our anger was very foreign, and it started having an emotional response. And I immediately started like welling up, and we were supposed to like get in another man's face, like be like growling or like maybe almost like yelling and like making like when you're about to fight someone, basically like that type of face at them. And for me, that was very emotionally, it just welled up a lot inside of me. And as I was going through that, another guy started having his process, and I'm not going to share his process, but as he's going through his process, I just started like shaking and just feeling like this physical response, and tears started like just coming down my cheeks a bit. And then after like someone has a process, they always go around and they ask, it's like a check-in is what they call it. Check-in, how are you feeling? What's going on? And I wasn't going to say anything. And then one of the leaders, he looks at me and he goes, Joe, how are you feeling? I'm like, honestly, I'm not feeling too good. I started feeling like I was crying and shaking a bit. And he goes, are you still feeling that right now? I'm like, yeah. He's like, you're stepping into the circle. And so he had me step in front of everyone. He goes, what's going on? And I started going into the story. And a lot of times the leaders will tell you, don't go into the story. Stick with the emotion. Like, how are you feeling? Like, what's going on? So I kind of like told too much of the story, but I still talked about like my mom, how like she raised me, how she lost all the children that she lost, and how most of my life I felt like she just controlled every aspect of my life. And he goes, all right, well, like, what would you say to, like, he's like, do you want to like maybe speak to your mom? And I'm like, I don't know. And he goes, okay, I want you to look around the group right now, and I want you to choose somebody who has a similar energy to your mother. And so my mom just has a stare. She has a look, you're going to die. That's basically like the look you're going to get. And she just like looks at you, and you just got to run for your life. For me, a lot of time that meant she's going to throw whatever inanimate object is nearby her. It's going to fly at my head. I better duck or dodge it, or else I'm going to die. And so I'm going around the room, and I'm looking at all the men, and one guy just had a stare like my mom. And I'm just like, that's it right there. So had him step in to be my mother, and basically, it's a bit embarrassing. I'm there in front of a bunch of men, and I'm not knowing what to say. It's like, it's a lot of pressure I felt, and that I just didn't know how to express myself. And then he goes, all right, like, at this moment, like, what do you want to say to your mom? And I'm just like, I couldn't come to words because I was just like, there was like a billion things coming in my head all at once. I'm just trying to think of like a thought. I'm trying not to look like an idiot in front of all these guys. And then like at the same time, he's like, all right, don't say it. Just express it with a sound. And I just remember just being like, just like getting so angry and like so like mad and so sad, and just like this like eruption of like just emotion for like a minute and a half, just literally just screaming like at the top of my lungs. And like that was just what needed to be expressed at that moment. And it's just like, and then I just kept saying, I remember I just kept saying like, why? Like, why? Like, why are we fighting all the time? Why are we always yelling at each other? Why can't we just sit like a normal family and have a normal conversation? Why can't we just not hate each other? Why can't we just stop cussing each other out? Like, just I don't understand. Like, I'm so sick of it. I'm so sick of us fighting. I'm so sick of us yelling. I'm so sick of not having a relationship with you. I'm just so sick of how we treat each other, and just like yelling this at the person that's standing in as my mother, and just like expressing all these things. And just I just remember like when I'm going through it, just feeling like fucking exhausted. Like, I'm just tired of like not being in a place where I can have a relationship with my mom and where we can talk to each other like normal people. And why does everything have to be a fight? And just why? And after like I got it all out, and I just remember standing there just feeling like defeated and just like exhausted, one of the leaders goes, okay, I now want you to switch places with your mom. And I was like, what do you mean? And he's like, I want you to pretend to be your mother. And then that's when it flipped a switch in my mind, because then he had me step in and I literally just switched places. And then, like, all the things that I expressed to you guys in the beginning is I never really thought about the depth of what my mom suffered as a human being. All the trauma, all the kids she lost, all the shit that happened, why she was so controlling, why I wasn't allowed to have friends, why I couldn't go out, why I had to be the best. And then it just started all pouring out of my mouth. And I'm just like crying and like understanding. I'm just like, I want you to be the best. I gave up my life for you. I care about you so much. Nothing else in the life matters. I had 6 of your brothers die. You know, like, you weren't supposed to live. I wasn't going to let anything hurt you. I want you to be the best because I grew up in the Middle East with nothing. I didn't have shoes on my feet. I wanted you to have all the things. And literally just like, I just never looked at it from my mom's perspective ever in my entire life.
Yeah.
I was just this fucking selfish little kid, and not saying I was selfish, just I was only looking and I only cared about what mattered to me. And so it like almost like shattered my reality when he had me step in as my mom. And he's like, just talk to you. And so I'm talking then to my mom. And then he had me go even deeper, which was like, he then goes, now I want you to be your grandmother talking to your mom. And then it was like him shattering my reality again. And me like realizing, fuck, dude, my grandma had 8 kids, 8 children. How the hell do you manage 8 children without whooping their asses? Yeah. Or like, you know, and my grandma was the sweetest lady. And she was the nicest woman that I ever met. And like, I can only imagine what she had to do to keep all of them in line. And then paying attention to the fact that she lost a couple of her kids too. And like, then speaking from the place of my grandmother. And like, by the time I'd done this, I'm like crying. I'm like not like holding it together very well. And then he goes, all right, now I want you to think, is there another woman or other women in your life that you've treated badly or like acted like this to? And then I go, yeah, my girlfriend. And so he goes, okay, I'm going to have somebody step in to be your girlfriend right now. And he has one of the guys step in to be Beth. And dude, I just like had this just like huge moment of realization where I just realized like I had hated my mom my entire life. Like I hated my mom. And the trickling effect from that was that I hated women. I just like really held resentment against them deep down in my heart. And it was like something deep to my core. And because of that, like I did not love my mom. I didn't fully really have any love for any women. And because of that, my girlfriend suffered the most because I did not fully love her. And just realizing that like I held this resentment. And even when I spoke to my girlfriend or when she would try to like lecture me or like not lecture me, just try to tell me something, I just felt like my mom was lecturing me. And so I never even had a full loving relationship with my ex because I was so broken and because this is how I felt towards women.
Did you, so earlier you mentioned that you would, you know, right now you said you hate your mom, but you would used to yell at your mom and get into these arguments. Yeah. Was that the same with like your relationships with other women too?
No, with other women, I was very docile because I was too scared of tapping into those emotions. I like hated how I communicated with my family, so I never showed that to anybody. The only people that ever saw that angry, pissed off, mad side of me was my family, and they always got the worst of it. And so I never yelled. I would just become like a little kid. Like I didn't know how to communicate whenever anybody would get emotional or intense with me because I was so like. I like felt that way. And so after like having this conversation then with the person standing in as Beth, one of the leaders goes, Joe, I want you to go stand on the other side of the room. And he goes, or before he did that, he goes, so Joe, it sounds like if you wanted to let go of this hatred that you have for women or this feeling that you have for women, you could have a relationship with your mom, with your grandma, with your girlfriend. And I just look at him and it's just like, yeah. Sounds like I'm in the way of myself. And then he goes, okay, I want you to stand on the other side of the room. He had me stand on the side of the room. He put up a sheet, and then he put the 8 biggest boys in our group in between me and who was my mom and my girlfriend at the time. And he goes, Joe, you need to get past these men to get to them. And they're not going to let you just pass. He's like, you need to get through them. And I immediately understood what he was saying. He was like, they're going to tackle me and they're going to fight me.
Yeah.
And so I immediately started going at them. And I'm not talking about like going at them like casually. I'm talking about like full blast, like football tackle. I took one guy to the ground. Another guy started wrestling me. I had to take him to the ground. And then like a couple of the guys were like 6'4", 6'5", like 220. I'm a little dude.
Yeah.
Okay. And like, but these guys were not just letting me go. And they're putting up a fight, and like I'm getting to the point where I'm starting to faint because like I'm literally going like as hard as I can, and they're like pushing me, they're tackling me, I'm like taking them down, and like finally like I get through the last like 2 guys. I remember just like breaking through. I actually like almost like fainted, like lost consciousness for a second because I was so out of breath. Like these are big boys, and they were making me learn a lesson, and they were helping me to learn a lesson, and I broke through them and got through. And then I got through the other side to my mom and my girlfriend, and it just was like me rewriting neural pathways to understand that this resentment that I held towards women and that my mom, and it was me just being in the way of myself. And that a lot of times I feel that your biggest obstacle is yourself to the solutions you're looking for. If you can get past yourself, you can get to the solution. And then just like feeling this huge sense of relief. And, right after that, I stepped outside with the person who was my girlfriend, and we talked for a bit, and I made a commitment to go on my trip that I wanted to go on, which was the Italy trip that I've been wanting to go on for a long time. I told him I would book the flight within 2 weeks, and that was the commitment I made before I went there. And I went through that process. And before I get into like the other process that I had in Maui, I guess, do you guys have any thoughts or comments about that?
And for anyone listening, when you hear this stuff and hear of like Joe like having to fight through like all these men to go for it, it might sound like strange and like it's just different. When you're actually in that moment and you're in these sacred containers is what they like to call it, and when you're actually feeling that person, like the guy that was interacting as your mom or as Beth in the example, it actually feels like you're talking to that person, and the way that the leaders take you into this space and the mindset you're in, it feels like you're in that exact moment, whatever the fight was or the scenario, and you can actually see the opposite side. And when you're going in that fighting process and you're trying to break through this mental breakthrough, it's all mental, but it feels like you're fighting for your life. It feels like you're about to die if you don't accomplish this. And he literally almost passed out. I had this similar experience. Like, it's hard to fathom if you're not in that situation, but in that moment, in that sacred container, it feels like this is it. If I don't do this, it's over.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah, I can only imagine for a lot of people that are listening, this all probably sounds extremely strange. But what I can tell you is the processes are very deep psychological work. After I broke through all those men, that's my brain basically rewriting those neurons and those neural pathways, saying, it's me saying to myself, I've made a conscious decision to go past this. And I'm going to say that, the experience would have been powerful without me having to fight through all those men. But the thing that like closes the loop, for lack of a better term, is me fighting through all those men and getting to my mom and my girlfriend to show that I've made the decision that I'm working past this. And so that level of the step is very important in my opinion. And unless you're there, like I said at the beginning of the last podcast, this is very much in-person things that emotionally they feel completely different when you're there. I'm doing the best I can to explain in the words, and I think I'm doing a pretty good job. But these are things that need to be experienced, and you can feel the emotions in person. I'm sharing a lot of this. Probably sharing it a little bit more publicly than I think a lot of the leaders of Sacred Sons might want. But it's my story to share, and I will share it the way that I want. But reliving these moments and going through this is extremely emotional. And I mean, if you're watching the video portion of this, you can see that on my face, but these are not things that I'm sharing with everybody like face to face. And I'm doing this on camera so that I can share it with more people, because reliving each one of these every single time. And I remember too, when James and I recorded this last time and they had and my video team had told me that the sound broke, it broke me as a person for a minute. I like literally couldn't comprehend that after I had emotionally not dumped, but expressed all this, and that it didn't work out. Like, reliving this is a lot. And for any of the guys that I know that have been through this, when they share their story, it's a lot. You're reliving your traumas that you have let go of, and to go back there is a lot to experience that. Yeah.
I have one more question. Once you were done with the process, did you do any type of work? Did you, like, I know you said that you hated your mom for the longest time. Did you feel like after this, did you forgive her? Did you feel like a relief? Or what did you feel after this towards your mom?
So, I was going to get to it later, but we can get to it now because you asked now. When I went home, I remembered the first night I got back from my trip, I just sat with my mom, and my dad wasn't there for some weird reason, which never happens. And I just remember for the first time in my life, we didn't fight, we didn't yell, we didn't argue about anything. We just sat, and we just talked about life. I remember asking stories about how she was raised in the Middle East, things that she experienced. And I remember leaving that night not feeling any animosity or anything whatsoever. And it was the strangest thing. I felt like I was in somebody else's house having an out-of-body experience, not living my normal life. But the biggest thing that it showed me was that when it comes to healing relationships with others, I think a lot of people think that the other person has to heal or go through this crazy thing. But the healing comes from within yourself. A lot of times other people are not ready to heal. Or it can be that other people are not ready to heal. But for me, what I've realized going through all this is that I just need to work on myself. My relationships will heal in the natural way that they need to, but it does not require the other person to heal or to go through their own process to have a normal relationship with them.
That's a good point.
Yeah. Yeah, so we were cool. We've been cool since. And what I will say, too, is I tried talking to my mom about this stuff. And I'm going to go back to I love my mom, nothing against her. She raised me the best she could. She did a great job. I turned out awesome. But I don't think that she's ready to have these conversations. I've had these conversations with my dad. We've talked about this stuff in full detail, and he's fully open to having these conversations. But as for my mom, every time we try to talk about this, we fight. And I remember one of the leaders talking to me about it, and he was saying, don't have this conversation then with somebody who's not ready. And even, for example, too, like when I was on a trip with one of my friends, I know he needs sacred sons. I know that sounds weird, but I just know he needs sacred sons. And every time I try to talk to him, he just deflects. He deflects. He just doesn't want to have the conversations. But I think him and I were raised very similarly, and we had very similar backgrounds, and we have very similar personality traits. And every time he's a bit drunk or we go out, these things come up, and I keep telling him, I think you need this or you could use this, but he doesn't want it. People will heal when they're ready to heal. That's a saying that I keep saying to myself. When they're ready, they'll ask, or they'll get led to where they need to go. Right. Yeah. But everyone's timeline is their own. Yep. Okay, so I had another process when I was in Maui, good old Maui. And, throughout the week, like, just so you guys know, we're not just sitting there crying and screaming the whole time. Like, we do things like, we, like, cook, like, dinner together, right? Like.
What is that?
I'll give you the details in a second.
Oh.
So this is a traditional. Okay, so this is a traditional Hawaiian meal where we wrapped in banana leaves different types of meats, and then they slow cooked it. And it's the same thing, like it goes back to re-indigenization. We used to cook together. We used to do ceremony together. You prayed over the food. And I'm not saying when we prayed over the food like we prayed over a specific religion. You pray however you want to pray. And if you don't have God, don't pray. It's not like that. It's just like when I say prayer, we're just giving love and energy to the food, and we're spending time together. And so we had a meal. We made the food together. We cooked it together. And like that's one of the things that we did. Another thing we did was a sweat lodge. We'll talk about the sweat lodge later. And then another thing that we did is we went to a waterfall. Oh no, this is something completely different. I apologize. Scratch that. We went to I'm not going to show that video. Scratch that video. We climbed down to like a waterfall and we all went swimming in the bottom of a waterfall together. Like we spend time together just hanging out, being kids, laughing, joking. And so then it got to Sacred Combat Day. So on Sacred Combat Day, there is where people get called in as champions, but when you're in a prime event, everybody fights, not just a couple people. So they also, during the middle of like the fights, they'll ask if somebody has a problem with another person and wants to fight another person. So
Did everybody have a problem with you, Joe?
I got called out.
One person or how many?
About that. And like even so too, like we played like a game the night before the fighting where I in typical Joe fashion tried to, I don't know, I'm not going to use the word manipulate, but I tried to do some things that would allow my team to take an advantage. And this is just like an example of like, okay, so just go back to the fighting. So we're at the fighting and one of the gentlemen calls me out and he says, I want to call out Joe. He's been super controlling with me. He keeps telling me what to do. He keeps acting this way. He like came up and he like rubbed my head and like was messing with me, and all the things that he described were all things that I thought I did like out of love, like just like caring, trying to help him, trying to help the people around me. And so he starts calling me out on all this stuff. And of course, I'm now in front of all the guys. I'm getting really embarrassed and I'm like, this is not cool. And then out of nowhere, one of the leaders goes, who else here has felt that Joe has been controlling this weekend? And one guy at a time starts going, Joe did this, Joe did that, Joe did this. When we were playing the game, Joe was acting like this. When we were doing that, Joe was doing this. And so I'm heated. I'm in the middle of the ring. I got boxing gloves on. I am not in a happy position. And I'm just feel like I'm getting called out by everybody and everyone's ratting me out or calling me out on a bunch of different shit. And I'm just like, what the hell's going on? And so next thing I know, I'm sitting there in front of everybody, and they're all calling me out one at a time, and I'm getting heated, and then I just, like, snap. And I'm just like, you know what? I fucking am controlling. I like to control everyone around me. I like to make sure people are not in my space. I don't like when people say things I don't like. I don't like when people act the way I don't like. I don't like when people do this around me. I am always in control of my situation and what's going on in my space. And then that was like me having an epiphany moment, like, holy fuck. All right, well, didn't expect me to say that. But after getting called out enough times, I kind of admitted it to myself. And then everybody just kind of shut the fuck up. And they're like, all right, let him fight. So then we went in there, and I'm heated at this point, and I'm a decent fighter. I kept knocking this guy quite a few times, and, you know, he hit me a couple times, but I realized during the fight I was actually trying to hurt him. And I did a couple times, and, you know, they ended up having to, like, stop the fight because I was getting a bit aggressive towards the end, and we ended the fight, and I don't think I really learned a lesson from the fight. I was just too heated and I couldn't hear anything and I was too frustrated with everybody. And after the fight, they asked him how he's feeling, and what I take from what he said is that we're cool. We squashed it. You know, Joe expressed this and he said that, and I can see where he's coming from. And it came down, and then I'm sitting there. I'm like, okay, cool. And then I just like didn't really have much to say because I didn't really think I processed it. I just felt like I was embarrassed and got called out in front of everybody. And then the next guy who had a process, I'm watching him have his process, and his trauma is similar to my trauma. He's very controlling, and I realize I'm very controlling. And so watching his process where he wouldn't let go of control and everybody started calling out him on different things, for some reason, something in my brain just like cracked open. And I'm sitting there, and I just started seeing all of these different times and events throughout my entire life where I was super controlling with like everybody in my life, whether it was like one of our close friends or like John, or just like what I've learned is like controlling is an aggressive word. I just don't have a problem stepping into my power is a good way of saying it. And I know that I have stepped into my power and crushed other people before in my life, because my energy and my personality is so strong that I basically overshadow or shut other people out, and I don't let them express themselves because my personality has decided that it's going to step into the light and shine and be more aggressive than somebody else's personality. And so I just started realizing by watching this guy go through his process, all these times in my life where I might have cut somebody off, where I didn't let them be themselves, where I might have like basically just overpowered them with what I'm saying or how I'm acting. And it was almost like, you know, when you die, or when the people say you watch your whole life like flash before your eyes, and I'm just watching them, like I'm watching this gentleman go through his process, and I'm like watching my whole life like flash before my eyes of all the times I've like shut out other people and just literally controlled them and never let them express themselves. And as I'm going through this, I start like shaking, going through my thing, going through like an emotional response. And out of all the people that like noticed me was the guy that I just got in a fight with. He just comes over to me and he's like, "Are you okay?" And I like started walking out of the room because I didn't want to be in front of everybody, because I like started having like a severe emotional response. And I'm like, "Not really." And he takes me outside, and I just immediately like just start like realizing how I'd like overshadowed and shut down so many people in my entire life. And then one of the leaders like just like comes out, and he just like sits down and he starts talking to me, and like I'm crying at this point. He's like, "Joe, like, don't you understand? Like, you became like your mom." And he just like literally just like that kind of like shattered my reality for a second, where it's like the one thing I hated the most about how I was treated was how controlling my mother was to me and the way she had treated me my whole life. And it was just this realization of I became my trauma. I'm controlling. I control everyone around me, and I do it from a place of love, just like my mother was. And it was just this realization of just like I'd shut down my family, my friends, everybody I loved, because I thought I was doing what was best for them, but really I was just controlling them. And I just like remember sobbing like a little kid for the first time since like my grandma died, which was like many years before, like when I was in high school. And I just like, it kind of just like shattered my reality in the sense that I now understood like what I had done to so many people. And it was also heartbreaking because I realized I didn't give people an opportunity to express themselves or to be themselves because I had literally shut them down. And that was a more powerful process than even the first one I had there, because it was just like this earth-shattering realization. And I started like researching even after that, like how most people a lot of times become their traumas, right? Like people that get molested, they go on and molest others. People that have drunk parents, a lot of times they become drunkards and they become Joe's drunk parents too. And it was just this realization that I had become the thing that I literally was most resentful for. And I had, you know, almost like hated my mom because of it when I had no reason to. And I'd become what I despise the most.
Yeah. Wow. That's crazy that even happened that way. I mean, looking back at it, but I remember situations, you know, with us friends, you know, where you were acting like that too. Yeah. Actually a lot of situations. And, I think we've called you out a couple of times on that, Joe. Yeah.
As you should.
Yeah. That's interesting that it had that effect on you, but you didn't realize that you were turning into your mom. And, you know, I guess it's kind of like you just kind of do it probably like unsubconsciously, like I was doing, you know, like acting like my dad. And it's probably because that's how you grew up and that's what you were taught, and it just is kind of a response you get, and you don't catch it until it hits you in your face, huh?
Yeah, I literally had to get punched in the face. A lot of people don't realize the best medicine is getting punched in the face.
Yeah.
And that's something I've learned the hard way a couple times now, is you literally got to get your screws knocked loose so you can see things from a different perspective. And it took me getting called out in front of a bunch of men, being embarrassed and like being put in a place of vulnerability and literally fighting it, because after the fight, you're just emotionally exhausted. So all your barriers and your walls that you have up on a regular basis, they're just down because you're tired. I wasn't fighting. We didn't make any rules before I got in that ring with that guy. I said, I'm going to fight you 100% right now. And he agreed to do the same thing. So I was going after him and he was going after me. And yeah, man, it was a really good realization. And so now I make sure when I do anything, am I crushing somebody? Am I pushing somebody else down? Am I overpowering someone? And don't get me wrong, I still step into my power. If I truly believe it's what's best for everyone, and I believe that from my core, I will step into my power and I will control the situation. But I don't do it in the same selfish ways as before, where I wasn't taking other people's emotions and feelings into consideration, and that I always thought I knew it was best. So it's like, at the same time, yes, it was a trauma and it could be bad, the way I step into my power. But I also think, too, I find myself to be one of the most confident and like self-sufficient people when it comes to leading a group, because I have no problem stepping into my power.
Yeah.
And it's like, a lot of times your traumas do turn into your greatest strengths, right? Like, I wasn't allowed to have friends. I think I'm like one of the most social people on the planet, right?
Yeah.
I was super controlled, and yes, I do control others sometimes too much, but I also am really good at putting people in positions and getting whatever needs to be done by leading. So it's like, your traumas can be a strength. They can be a weakness. It's all how you frame it and how you use it. And the way I'd been using it most of my life is, it was good sometimes, but it was bad a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You could probably get a bunch of people not to go to a techno show.
Dude, I literally, I'm going to tell you right now, I've used my power a lot of times to convince everyone to not go to the techno show.
Yeah.
So you are not wrong.
Yeah. Well, I will tell you this, a positive experience is that I know we would always be able to get food at like 3 or 4 a.m. with you. He's like, we got to go eat. And I'm like, we don't want to eat. Actually, that was a really great idea, Joe. Yeah, we're eating.
So sometimes the ideas worked out, but other times I'm like, oh, fuck Joe Naz.
Yeah. There's been a couple times in my life I can remember specifically, fuck Joe Naz. So I agree with that. Should be a t-shirt.
Yeah.
Yeah. But there's other times where somebody needs to just take the lead,
Yeah.
It's like
not bad at all.
No, it's like sometimes when we're like at a music festival, or like that's like a base example. It's like, I will always follow the person that knows where they want to go. Right.
Yeah.
If someone's like, I'm the most excited, I want to go see this person, great, I'm going with that person. That sounds exciting. Otherwise, you're all just sitting there confused a lot of times, like, what do we do, where do we go, what's happening,
who do you want to see?
No, it's like, we're going here, we're doing this, we're meeting back left, this is it. And it's just part of life, right? And I really now look back and I'm really proud of the fact that I have no problem stepping into my power, but I'm really also ashamed of the way I did shut other people down, because I feel that I do have a lot of friends that don't have strong personalities.
Yeah.
And I have closed them out many times when they might have had something valuable to add or something to say, and I just completely said no. Yeah. So that's Hawaii, in a nutshell. And yeah, do you have any thoughts or comments on that before we move on to the next part?
I still find it like very fascinating that the one thing that you despised or hated the most, you turned into, like, that's just crazy, because you weren't trying to, and it just happened.
It just happens.
Yeah.
I mean, so what I would say is, it didn't just happen. That's wrong. I think that it's because, okay, so you can look at it a couple ways. The way I look at it as, you were taught that, right? That's how I was taught.
Yeah.
This is how you're supposed to be. Same thing, like, you're taught it's okay to be a drunk parent, or you're taught it's okay to molest, or you're taught it's okay to yell. You're taught all these things, even though they're called traumas, it's also teachings.
Yeah.
Right? Like, this is what you are now trained. This is how your computer program is programmed. Someone did this to you your whole life. The person that is closest to you, your mom, your dad, what I feel is that I learned this is the way to be. And so you then take that and it becomes part of who you are.
Yeah.
And so it's not too crazy to understand that you do become what you learn.
Yes.
Even though it's fucked up. Well, matter of perspective.
Yep.
What I believe is fucked up, And at the same time, matter of perspective, now that I'm older and I understand how my mom was raised and the things she went through, it wasn't that fucked up for her. It was what she was taught and what she learned. And I definitely deserved my ass whoopings, and I earned them many times. Yeah. Like, and at the same time, right? Like,
if you weren't being a little shit, you wouldn't have gotten whooped all those times, right?
100%. I cannot disagree with you. So yeah. And then at the end of that event, the last two things I want to comment about is I did get convinced, I'm going to say convinced because I was definitely convinced, to join leadership training with Sacred Sons. So that's how I ended up going to another event, which leadership training, you essentially learn how to hold space and potentially facilitate, if you need to, men that are going through a emotional traumatic response. And so I took that course. And then they also invited me to be part of a group of called the 33, which is what they're calling a master heart now, where essentially it was just a lot of the most successful businessmen within Sacred 33 that could afford to do 3 prime type events every year, and then the Convergence was also part of it too. And so they asked me to join that, and my intuition said to join that, and I'm glad that I did. I got a lot of lessons out of it. But from there, I basically spent a little bit more time in Maui, and the thing I want to share about Maui before we end this is, if any of you ever heard the Road to Hana, the Road to Hana is essentially a road that goes around the entire island. It's one of the most beautiful, just drives you can ever take in your entire life. And John recommended I do it by myself, and I'm so happy that I didn't take a friend with me. And I stopped at every trail, and I stopped at every place, and you see waterfalls, you see beaches, you see little towns, and you just take your time, and your phone doesn't really work, and you just spend some time with you, yourself, and I. And what I showed you a video of earlier was this waterfall video. Like, was one of the waterfalls, just super beautiful. Me just whistling along. And this was one of the waterfalls, and you can just climb down to them. I went swimming at every waterfall, just got in the water. That's and cool. It was cool. And then, like, this is just, like, what the road looked like on the road to Hana. I don't know what I was listening to, but yeah, and it's just probably like definitely not techno. Tech, absolutely not. And yeah, this is just beautiful road. It's like windy road on the sides of the mountains, which was super cool. And then, like, this was like a beautiful tree that was at a this was like a ecological resort, which is basically different types of plants. And this is, if you look down below with the drone, I have some drone shots. It's where Jurassic Park was shot.
Yeah, I was going to say, this looks like yeah.
Dude, look at this tree.
That tree is amazing.
This thing is straight from Avatar. It's ready to take off.
Tree of life.
Dude.
What kind of tree is that, Joe?
I don't know. Sick.
Joe, you know everything. What is that tree?
It's funny you say this. It's in my photos. I remember taking a photo of the sign because I was like, I want to remember what type of tree this is. But this tree is fly. Yeah. Really cool. And so, yeah, this road to Hana, you just get waterfalls, different beaches. It was really beautiful. I could say, actually, I can show you one sec. I do have some videos real quick that I can show you real fast. Perfect.
Yeah, Hawaii's beautiful. So this was
like the hotel. Like, I stayed on the beach, which was really nice. I made it a point during my whole trip to, like, stay on always places I could see the ocean if possible. And so this was like my condo that was like along the beach, which was super cool. That's me right there. And then this was Haleakua. Was this Haleakua? This was like the waterfall that was below Haleakua, which was super cool.
Did you stay by the ocean?
I like I said, I made it a point to stay by the ocean, but this was the place. This was when we were. Oh no, actually, this is the road to Hana. I completely apologize. This was just one of the rivers on the road to Hana, and I was just getting some drone footage of that. And this was the resort that we stayed at. This was just like another part of the road to Hana Drive. Like, it was just absolutely beautiful, just scenery, which was super cool.
What time of year did you go out?
This was December. What am I talking about? It was right after Convergence. Yeah. Oh. It was a month after.
How was the weather out there in December?
It was perfect.
Yeah.
Literally perfect. It actually rained a bunch, but other than the rain, it was perfect. And then I'll just show you this one, which was cool. This was a sunset that I caught one night, which was super rad. Let's go on to the next part here, which would be I decided to join leadership training, and then would be the leadership conference. And when did you go to your event?
Mine was that I think it was around my February of this year.
February.
Somewhere around that time.
Okay, that's perfect. Okay, so we're gonna end an episode here. That'll be Maui Prime. And now we are moving on to leadership training. Leadership training is essentially a Sacred Sons program that you can take that helps you if you're looking to hold space for other men. They have a video program, and I feel like I'm just giving infomercials for Sacred Sons, which I'm not at all whatsoever. I just really appreciate this organization, and I'm trying to express what I went through. And I got heavily involved with their stuff, and I don't get any benefit from anybody attending their events. I just really appreciate what I received energetically and emotionally from these events. And I guess the biggest thing that I just received is what I've talked on previous podcasts about is just the definition of presence, right? When you're with somebody else, you feel that they're the most important person on the planet. And at every event that I've been to with the Sacred Sons guys, every guy I talked to would talk to me like I was the most important person. They would just give me their full presence, and they'd really pay attention to what I was saying, and they'd genuinely care about what I was saying, and it was really nice to receive that. So I'm hoping by sharing this with the world that I can give you the presence of my story, and that if you resonate with this and you're looking for some sort of presence, maybe you attend one of the events, or if you need someone to reach out and speak to, you're more than welcome to reach out to me, but that you find the support that you need through other men. And I can't speak for what women need. I'm not a woman, and I don't plan on ever identifying as one. And what I'll say is, if you are looking for that type of support, try to find groups that can provide you with that type of support. I know they have a group for women. I just don't know any females in my life that have attended their event, so I can't speak for what that event is like. Okay. Long-winded sideways tangent. Back on track now. We're at leadership training. Leadership training was in beautiful Oracle, Arizona, and it was absolutely gorgeous. And
Arizona's really nice depending on what time of year it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this was in the beginning of the year.
It was January.
January.
It was a bit cold.
Was it? Yeah, I was gonna say I've been to Arizona when it's like negative degrees.
Yeah, Oracle's like out in the desert, so it was deep in the desert. But it was beautiful sunrises, just beautiful mountains that we got a chance to experience. Here's like a video of the sunrise, just so you can see. We'll just watch this for a second.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
And what you're seeing here is essentially, my videotaping skills were way too fast, but what you're seeing is basically something that a lot of the men do at these events, where they will gather for sunrise just to greet the sun. And Kale, who's one of the leaders of the group, he teaches these songs, these Hawaiian songs. And for me, I know, like, I was always made fun of a lot when I was younger to sing and not to sing. I'd always be like, you ever hear when people are like, oh, who sings that song? Let's keep it that way. Yeah, I was one of those types of kids. And so because of that, I never participated in singing, and I always felt ashamed of it. And so we gather many mornings of the Sacred Sons events, and we will sing a Hawaiian song that was taught to us by Kale. And the song, it talks about the rising of the sun and how the sun is coming over the precipice, it's coming over the peak, and as it's coming over, be aware of the new beautiful day that's coming through. And Hawaiian language is not an exact translation language, meaning that it can have many different meanings. Just like I know this because I speak Arabic. Arabic, one word can have multiple meanings, right? Like, for example, habibti is like how you'd say my girlfriend, but it also can just mean a girl that I deeply care for, or it can mean my love, or it can mean somebody that's a close friend of mine that's a female, right? And like our words have different meanings. And so the Hawaiian language can have different meanings. And like the song that he taught us it's called Eala E, and the song goes, Eala E kalahi kahikina o kamawana kamawana hono pi kaleva nu I kahikina eyakala Eala E. And so we all sing it together. And what I'll say is, yeah, thanks. Starting an album next week.
Who sings that?
Joe Naz.
Yeah.
And
you know, in like Filipino culture, you know, singing is part of the culture.
yeah.
You have to do karaoke every weekend.
Yeah. But dude, I mean there's like multiple levels to how, when I remember the first time I remembered hearing the Hawaiian guys sing a song together, it just made me feel at home. I don't know, that's the best way I can describe it. It made me feel safe, it made me feel comfortable.
It's beautiful.
It made me feel good. And it's just like when in my frat, for example, we had songs that we all sang together. All the frat bros sang together. And when you sing that song, it's like this level of camaraderie, and you're singing songs. And like, especially because this song is like, it has a deep meaning. It means something good and it feels good, right? And so that feeling can resonate. And two, just also being able to express yourself, even if you might not have a voice that should be on American Idol. If you're just having the opportunity to sing because it feels good to sing. And they show studies that when you sing, it activates your vagus nerve and it makes you feel good and it releases endorphins. And yeah, and so I've regained that expression of myself, and I find myself even singing songs in the car now where I was embarrassed even when I'm by myself because of traumas that I might have suffered as a child where I got made fun of, and it just feels good to sing and to express yourself. And so yeah, this is an example of like every morning we'd get together, whoever was awake. You're not required to by any means, but at least like 20-30 guys would get up out of 60 and they would greet the sun and they would sing the sunrise song.
Yeah.
It was cool.
Yeah, you have to sing, man, even if it's in the shower.
Yeah.
I feel like it's like a stress relief too, especially if your jam comes on and you're just like cruising in your car. It's like you don't care. You're just like, yeah. And then you look over, you're like, yeah.
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 Cut my life into pieces. This is my
I mean,
last
I went
resort.
through the whole emo phase in like, you know, in middle school, and man, we used to just like sing our hearts out, you know, and scream and stuff, and it was fun. Yeah. But you know, I was looking at your sunrise pictures and or your video here, and I recently took little Killian out on top of Runyon. We did like an early morning hike. I did it 2 days in a row, and it was just like so nice to be outside. Nobody's really up in LA yet, you know, and it was on the weekend, and just watching the sunrise was just like amazing. Yeah, it's really nice.
Yeah, there's a very special energy about greeting the sun. I've greeted more sunrises, I think, with the Sacred Sons guys than I've greeted on my own in the last decade. And you're like you said, there's a stillness.
Yeah, it's amazing, and it too, like you have to hike up to the top, so it's like, you know, you're accomplishing something early in the morning, and then you get to the top and you can relax for a minute and watch the sunrise. And this time of year is like amazing for sunrises and for sunsets. Like the sky turns purple and orange. Yeah, it's beautiful.
Very
So
cool.
how long was, I mean, I feel like this is like probably like going to be a couple of days or 3 days like out in the desert.
Yeah, so most of these events are a couple days. You're looking at least, I want to say, 3 days. Then you add the half day when you get there and the half day when you leave. So a lot of them are like that. And this event was all leadership trainees. So this was all people that had all been to Sacred Sons events already. I didn't even know that I still had any processes to have. I thought, okay, cool, I'm all better. I'm going to be fine. It's going to be all right. And then I get there and, you know, emotions just start welling up as you watch other people going through their stuff. And for me particularly, it's a bunch of the leaders, right? So everybody's gone through the training. There's a lot more support and a lot of people trying to grow. And there was one activity that we did, and that was led by, in my group, there just happened to be a psychologist, child psychologist. And he led an activity which was just going back to your youth and going back to your childhood. And for me, I don't know what it is. I just can't remember most of my childhood. And I don't know if it's a traumatic response of just like fight or flight, shutting it out. You just shut out bad experiences. And I know I had a beautiful youth. I know my parents gave me everything. I was spoiled. I had all this stuff. But I think I was in trouble more than not because I was always pissing my mom off because of one reason or another. And so for that reason, my brain has shut out a lot of my youth. And specifically, when I go back to my youth, there was one memory in particular which always came to mind. And so for me, whenever I was in trouble, I would run to the bathroom and I would hide in the bathroom because that was the only place in the house that I could like keep the door shut. Because that was the only place I could get leverage to like hold the door shut. I would put my feet against the tub and then push the door shut with my back. And that's how I protected myself. And so, like I've told you in previous podcasts, I wasn't really allowed to get bad grades. It just wasn't allowed. You just don't do it. And I forget, I remember specifically I was in second grade, and I remember I had to read this book for a project, and my mom made me a costume. The costume was a fox, and she made me this whole thing from scratch. She took all this time to make it. I literally was this fox. It was adorable.
You clever fox.
Yeah, little sly fox. Yeah. I was adorable. I remember wearing this thing to school, but I remember my mom pissed me off. I just remember feeling really angry at her, mad at her for some reason, like not happy whatsoever. And basically, I remember saying to myself, feeling all smug, I'm going to fail my test on purpose. Horrible idea. I remember being in front of my entire class in second grade, and the teacher asking me questions about the book. And she knew I read the book because she talks to my mom like every day when my mom sees her. And I remember failing this test or the questions that she asked me in front of the whole class. And I remember her specifically being like, are you sure you don't know the answers? Are you positive? And I remember this was probably the only time in my life I've ever feigned being dumb, because I don't like the feeling of being dumb.
Yeah.
Dumb has to be a choice of like, not a choice. It's just like I was dumb because I didn't know, but like I literally remembered pretending to be dumb. And I was like, oh no, yeah, I don't know the answer. And so I failed. And she gave me a C. I don't know why she gave me a C. She should give me an F. I literally answered none of the questions and pretended to know none of the questions. And I remember getting home and my mom asking me, well, how'd you do? How did you do on the thing? And I remember just being like all smug because I was angry at her. I just remember being like, I got a C. And my mom was like, what do you mean you got a C? I'm like, I got a C. And like I kept saying it like almost like prideful, Yeah. And
C plus.
Long story short, mistakes were made. And I started getting my ass whooping, and my mom was chasing me around the house. And I remember running to that bathroom so fast, and she had already like given me a couple whoopings, and I get in that bathroom, and I just remember like sitting there and pushing my feet up against that toilet. And so like when we were doing this meditation, that's like a lot of times when I do childhood meditations, that's where I went back to for the longest time. That's like where I went, just straight to that bathroom, me being that little kid, legs pushed up against the tub, toilet here to my left, door behind me, pushing as hard as I can. And just the loud banging, my mom screaming and yelling in Arabic, because when I was in trouble, it was never in English, it was always in Arabic. And just literally hearing her banging on that door. And this time, she was pissed. And she took a metal bat to the door, and she was breaking down the door.
Oh, my God.
And, yeah, she ended up getting in through the door, and I got my ass whooping.
When she would yell in Arabic, would she call you Yusuf?
100%. 100%.
Yusuf!
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot with that, too, right? Like, why why is my name Joseph, right? And all I can say is it's a separate conversation entirely. We're going to stay on topic here. We'll talk about that later. But yeah, when I'm in trouble, my mom calls me Yusuf. And because that's my real name is Yusuf. And yeah, she was coming to kill me. and I earned my death this time on purpose by failing on purpose. And
What did she do when she like broke through the door?
we're not going to get into details. But I was in trouble is all you need to know. And I'll just never forget the fear that I had in there. And I remember hiding in there for hours as she was like yelling and screaming. And like, it was like almost as if I had hurt her. And like the way Arabs insult you is they say like, they curse themselves. Like she was cursing her heart, she was cursing her mind, she was cursing God, and like like almost like Arab parents use reverse psychology to like make you feel bad. Where she's like, "I'm the worst mother ever. How did I raise you? Why did I raise you like this? Why would you do this? What is wrong with me? Your dad is horrible. Your mom is horrible. Your grandma." Like literally, that's like when she's like yelling to like break the door. Like this is how they like insult themselves, is they insult themselves because they're saying, "I raised you badly, I did a horrible job as a mother, how could this ever happen?" And so they're yelling this at you. So that's like a bit traumatizing on top of all of it, because they're making you feel bad for how they raised you. And so we're doing this meditation, and as I'm doing this meditation, like just immediately like I start shaking like a little kid, and just like tears just start like running down my eyes, and like I'm not having a good time holding it together. And, you know, everyone's silent at this point except for me. I'm like whimpering in the corner. And the leader, the psychologist, he has me like, he goes, "Would you be okay with stepping in front of everybody?" I'm like, "I don't really want to." And he's all like, "Are you sure?" And I'm like, "This is really embarrassing for me." And he's like, "Okay, if you're willing to, we'll all be here with you and we'll support you through it." And I'm like, "Okay." So then they all sit around me. And, you know, I mean, like, I'm a grown man. Nobody likes to cry in front of other grown men. It's just like, it's a lot. So he says, "Okay, I want you to just close your eyes and where are you? What's going on?" And, you know, like I've said in previous podcasts, I love my mom. She was so badly hurt because she wants me to have the best. And because I consciously decided to fail, she couldn't comprehend that. And she thought by spanking me, it was going to make me learn that I should not fail, because she wanted me to have the best, because she gave up her life so I could have the best. So with that context, we go back into the bathroom, and, you know, at this point, I'm just like crying in front of everybody, and I tell them what's going on and what I did and how I failed my mom. And basically what he asks is like, "Okay, what do you want to do right now?" And I'm like, "We got to get little Joe out of there." And so everyone goes, "Okay, we'll agree to go get little Joe out of there." So we take him, and he goes, "Where do you want to take little Joe?" And so we take little Joe to my cousin's house where we played Super Smash Brothers, because when we were around other people, my mom wouldn't hit me or spank me, or I wouldn't be in trouble, because I don't know the reasons why. I just know when others were around, she wouldn't act that way.
Yeah, it was just be a wait till we get home.
Yeah, wait till we get home.
She'd just give you the look.
Yeah, just give you the look, like you're gonna die later.
Yeah.
And
to be continued.
yeah, and so, you know, my cousins were my only friends at that time, and I wanted to go take him there where he was safe. And so we sat, played Super Smash Brothers, and we talked for a minute, and I talked to him, and then he's like, "Okay, what do you want to do now?" And it's like, "Do you want to go back to the bathroom and confront your mom?" I was like, "Okay." And so, you know, we went back to the bathroom, and same thing as one of my first processes, he goes, "Who here has an energy like your mom?" And one of the guys from Maui was in this group also, and he just like, we almost like smirked at each other for a second. And I was like, this is deja vu. I'm literally reliving the same thing, but it was completely different, because it was a different trauma that had a different effect on me. And what it was is like, he goes, "Okay, I'm going to have somebody step in as your mother." So he had somebody step in my mother, but it was different this time. He had everybody get in front of me. I had to wrestle through them. This time it wasn't as aggressive. I remember that. These guys, there were some big boys in Maui. This one, like, it was like they let me through a little bit easier. They got through, and it wasn't supposed to be as like physical of a response, because he wanted me to confront my mother. And I confront her, and this time when I confront her, he had me say to her, "Mom, I am my own I am my own man now, and I make my own decisions. And I had to repeat it over and over again. And then at the end of it all, he then goes, now I want you to add, and I want you to tell her that you don't care what she thinks at all anymore. And that was very difficult for me to say, because my whole life, I literally have done everything in my life concerned about what my parents think and say. And that's how I've made all the decisions in my life. And just to say that out loud was very, very difficult for me. I was like trembling. And so it was like confronting her and just looking her in the eyes and being like, Mom, I am my own man and I make my own decisions now. And I do not care what you think. And it was this whole just like cascading, like same thing, like visions in my mind, just realizing there's so many times in my life I never did what I wanted to do because I was too concerned about what my parents thought. Part of the reason I never went on this trip to Italy before was because I was too scared of what my parents would think. I was just always so scared of what they would think and what they wanted, and I never made decisions like based off of what my emotions were. Like, why don't I ever yell? Why don't I ever express myself? Because I'm too worried about what my parents think. Because I'd had it ingrained in my mind that if I act badly or I act against my parents, I'd be in trouble. And that little scared kid took over, and I didn't make decisions for myself. And so, yeah, basically went through that process and was able to realize that I'd been making decisions about my life based on what my parents think and what they wanted for my life instead of what I wanted for my life. Yeah. And I confronted her, and I let that go. And that was the first process at the leadership training. Yeah.
Do you still think about things like when you do? Does that like come back to your mind? Like
About my parents?
Yeah.
No.
No.
Dude, it's so fucking weird. It had a grip on my entire life. I couldn't make decisions based on what I wanted.
That's crazy. So, like, let's say you were gonna go do something. That's the first thing that popped in your head was like,
Are
"Oh,
my
what is
parents
my?"
gonna get mad at me?
That's crazy.
It's like literally was like part of my core programming. Because I'd just piss them off. In my mind, as a child, I'd piss them off that much that it was literally part of my fight or flight response. So, yeah, I literally made most decisions in my life based on what my parents think and what they wanted. And it was disheartening. It was sad. And it's just crazy to show you again that it's like you have to make the decision to go past it.
Yeah.
No one can do it for you but yourself.
Did it like stress you out a lot, making decisions like that?
All the time. Imagine you're never making decisions for yourself. You're just always trying to think of what other people want. This is part of the reason that I always was speaking from a place that wasn't my heart. It's because I was always just speaking from what do my parents think what do I think my parents want me to say? How do they want me to act? What do they want me to do? Imagine how exhausting that is.
That sounds very exhausting.
My entire life, I didn't care what I thought. I always had to create a speech, think of what other people want, think about what other people are thinking, and never just do what I felt was right.
Yeah, because I've never lived my life like that. But now that I'm married and I have a kid, like I do think about certain things, like what are the consequences of my actions if I do this? Is this the best decision for my family?
Yeah.
But I've never like had that weight over my shoulders, like someone's watching me and they're gonna approve or disapprove, and that's wow, man. I would be very stressed out.
It was, dude. It was like living in a constant state of stress. And I read a book recently called How to Do the Work by Nicole LaPerla. If anyone wants to learn about trauma, read this book. It changed my life. And it taught me, like, when you don't take time to process this stuff, your body is essentially living in a state of fight or flight its entire existence. And that affects your vagus nerve. And so the vagus nerve affects pretty much most of the physical reactions in your body. And so if you're constantly in fight or flight, a basic thing is like you're always inflamed. You can't heal. You're always sick. You might pass out. But I know from what I've read is that there's so many physical ramifications like cancer, diseases that come from you not processing trauma or these emotional moments in your life that cause you to have severe emotional physical responses, because the body stores emotional responses physically. And so
when you say that again?
Okay. when you have an emotional event happen to you, if you don't process it. So let's say you yelled at me right now.
Mm-hmm.
That's an influx of energy to my body. If I don't properly channel that, whatever that might be, maybe I need to yell, maybe I need to cry, maybe I need to go to the gym, maybe I need to do something, maybe I need to talk, whatever it is, if that energy doesn't move, it stores within you. Do you ever like, for me, there were a lot of times in my life where I just wanted to yell and scream. Like just scream at the top of my lungs because I was so frustrated or so mad or so angry. And instead I didn't. And I would literally feel my body shaking and I would literally feel physically sick to my stomach. That is your body, in my opinion, storing physical trauma within you. And so most of my life, me ignoring my thoughts, me ignoring yelling, me ignoring crying, me ignoring how I felt was me storing physical trauma within myself. And so I was making myself physically and mentally ill.
I see.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think I've ever felt like that.
That's amazing.
Where I just felt, I mean, I think I felt like ill to my stomach of like something that I did to like someone and I just immediately regretted it. But like, do you hold that? Like,
I just held it.
yeah.
I just held all of it.
Yeah, I've had similar experience. Like when I like sacred sons, they always reflect it. They use the word like your inner boys like streaming out. They always like to. But I've had the similar things where it's like all you want to do is scream at the top of your lungs, and then you hold it in. And like they've done, like you said, they've done studies on this. Like when we were first created, fight or flight used to be a real thing. We had to run away from a predator. They had to spike all the hormones and stuff like that in order to escape. But now, like present day technology, even like certain text messages, all these little tiny stressors constantly just like flip that switch. Like you said, if you don't process it, it's just intoxicating.
Yeah, it's intoxicating. It literally, from what I've read and from what I understand, it becomes a physical response. And so your mental health, it translates from top to bottom. It's not just emotional. It's emotional and physical. It has a direct correlation. And so if you're not processing things and you're just leaving it be within your body, it will make you physically ill.
I see.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was the first process there. And then the second process that I had there was we had sacred combat again. And so this time I was chosen to be one of the champions. So I went in there and I was boxing a guy again who didn't really know how to fight very well. And so we're in the middle of the boxing and, there's 60, 70 guys around you. They're all cheering. They're banging on drums. It's exciting.
Yeah.
You want to look cool. You want to look awesome. You want to do a good job fighting in front of them. And so him and I made a commitment to go 80% and that I was going to keep that word and I wasn't going to go above that. But every time he needed a breather, every time I'd get a couple of knocks in, I felt myself getting a couple extra when I should have backed off because it was more than 80% because I wanted to look cool and I was feeling all charged up from everybody cheering and all that kind of stuff. And essentially the last round, as the clock is going out, he put his arm up to stop, but I still kept punching him a bit more because I thought I was looking cool in front of everyone. And so essentially, and I blooded him up a little bit at this point, and so I thought I looked cool in front of everyone. I didn't look cool. And essentially I did break my commitments. And at this point everyone's cheering and yelling, and then one of the guys yells, he needs to fight somebody who knows how to fight. And then everybody starts cheering and yelling even more. And I'm like, okay, well, shit, all right. I'm not saying anything at this point. They're all just kind of talking. And then one of the guys, he literally jumps in to fight. And he was a bigger dude than me. He's 20, 30 pounds heavier than me. And I'm not really saying anything at this point. He takes off his shirt. He comes in the rings. They put gloves on him. Everybody's cheering for us to fight. And then I sit there and I just realized this is being forced upon me. And I did not want that. I realized this has to be my own decision if I'm going to do this. Otherwise, I just was not going to accept anything that came my way from it. And so I just stuck my hand up and everybody just shut up for a second. And I just remember saying, this has to be my decision and it can't be any of yours. and I was talking to everybody, and I just like took a couple deep breaths because I just fought. I mean, even
Yeah.
though I like kind of punched the guy a couple extra times on the last one, like I was going full blast on that one. I didn't go 80%, so I was a bit out of breath. I was like, okay, and I was like, okay, I'll fight him. And so so I fought him, and I didn't do a horrible job, but about halfway through the fight, he just clocks me right in the nose, and I just felt my nose kind of crumble a bit. And then he just hit me on the side of the head at the same time, and I saw little stars. And then I just blood started coming down my face. And like from that point forward, my head was just like not in the fight. Like I was trying to be there, but I wasn't. But I just kept like feeling super embarrassed. I'm in front of 70 guys. I just made myself look like an ass. I broke commitments. I look like this guy who just like broke his commitments for everyone. I'm trying to look cool. Like all these things are just swirling in my head, and I can't even focus on the guy in front of me. And I really respect him a lot because I think he could tell after he got me and I started bleeding, I was like there, but I was like a ghost. Like I was a zombie just in the match. Like I was moving and I was doing that, but I was not like really throwing punches anymore. And I was just kind of like in my own head. And he punched me one more time right in the nose, and I wasn't really defending. And I think he could tell I just was out of it. And so the rest of the match, we just kind of like danced in front of each other for a second. And I remember when it was done, I was just so embarrassed because I'm bloodied up at this point. I felt like this guy just came into the match to teach me a lesson. I was super embarrassed. And like I just keep saying the word, I was just embarrassed. This is literally the emotion that was just, I was shameful, embarrassed. He puts the microphone up to the one guy. I don't even remember what he said because I was just so in my head. And then he comes up to me and I remember saying, I don't want to say a fucking thing. You're just going to cut me off again. And then I just like stormed off like a little kid in front of everybody. And at this point now, like tears are starting to come down my face. I'm super embarrassed. I just didn't know what to say. And I walk outside and basically one of my friends chases after me, and he could see I'm like, my head just started going like in this like downward spiral of like negative thoughts about myself. And like we never really gotten into this part yet or talked about what my brain is. And like because of the way that I was raised, where no matter what I did in my life, if I didn't get an A+ or was perfect, I was never good enough. So thus, in my mind, I was never good enough. No matter what I did, no matter what I said, no matter how I acted, no matter what I did in my life, I was never good enough. You guys heard how it affected me or like what the mental repercussion is, but you aren't hearing what's going on in my brain. In my brain, it's, oh, you're a loser. You're a piece of shit. Why the fuck did you fuck that up? Why aren't you good enough? Why aren't you strong enough? Why didn't you get that done? You could have done so much better. That's not good enough. Oh, you've done this. That's not good enough. Keep going. You got to keep doing that. This isn't good enough. Keep doing this. And he literally knocked a screw loose, and I couldn't stop the flood of emotional negative talk that literally was exploding like a dam that had exploded, and just I couldn't stop it. And like I was like a crazy person for a second, like tears are like coming down my face, and I just couldn't think straight. And like I'm walking over to like go sit down, and my buddy came over to me, and he just starts asking me, he's like, dude, what's going on? Like, what's going on in your head? And I just start like telling him like all the negative things. I'm like, dude, I'm just so ashamed. I'm so embarrassed. I'm such a bully. I'm an asshole. You know, like what the hell's wrong with me? Why am I such a bad person? Why did I do this in front of everyone? And he's like, what else is coming up for you? And like just trying to talk me through it. And I'm like, the fact that I've broken other commitments in my life, you know, I've cheated on relationships when I was younger, and through all that stuff, just like realizing all of the negative and bad things that I've done. And he's just like, and like, I just was like, I was just swirling. Like I had like cracked an egg loose and like a screw loose. And I'm sitting there, and I just like tell him, I'm like, I got to be alone. Like, you got to go. And just like, I went in my room, and I'm sitting there, head spinning. And like, he's like, look, bro, just come watch my fight. I'm fighting a little bit. Try to pull it together. Just, I know you can, just to come out for a second. And I go out there. I take a minute to myself. All the thoughts are swirling. I can't stop them. I'm like, but I somehow get dressed, and I go back out there, and I go back out to his fight, and I watch it. I was too embarrassed to go inside. I watch it from a window outside the building. And then a couple of the guys saw me out there, and they came up to talk to me. And like one of the guys comes up to me, and he's like, Joe, like, I'm so proud of you. good job. And I just like literally push him away. I'm like, good job. Are you freaking kidding me right now? And like literally did not want to hear what he had to say. Another guy like walked up to me and like tried to give me a hug. He's like, dude, we're like, oh my God, I've watched you. And like, I know I couldn't have done that. And like, same thing. I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? Dude, I don't agree with anything you're saying. And just like pushed him away and like didn't want to hear anything anybody had to say, especially if it was something good about me. I did not want to hear that. I like wanted to stay in my misery and wanted to be stuck in that in a very deep way. And then like I go to the back door, I'm watching the rest of the fights from the back door. John had a fight and like I'm not going up and like the whole time like tears are like coming down my face. Like I'm just like stuck in this negative thought loop. And then they ask us to like stand in front of everybody so they could cheer for us at the end like the champions, and I did not want to do that. I forget, somebody physically came and forced me to the center of the circle, and like as everyone's cheering, like I'm just like more embarrassed and just like tears are coming out my face, and then like it's over and I start walking away and John grabbed me. I start having like an emotional breakdown for a second, and then I'm like, I gotta go, and I literally just like left. And when I left, I walked, it was night, it was getting to be nighttime at this point. I walked deep into the ravine. We were in the desert. I walked into a ravine where nobody would find me and nobody would see me. And I essentially just walk around. So I walk in this ravine and I walk around for several hours talking to myself like a crazy person, out loud talking to myself. And during that time, I am just talking to myself, saying the most negative things that you'd ever say to like your worst enemy, saying that, you know, I don't actually care about other people, that I only care about myself, that really the only reason that I do what I do for a living is so that I can make money and I don't actually care about anybody else, that I'm like the most selfish person I ever met, just like basically a negative self-talk loop about everything, like attacking my personality traits, my physical traits, who I am as a person, the decisions I made in my life, everyone around me, why I've done the things I do, why I do anything that I do, and I'm just yelling this at myself out loud for hours.
Jeez.
And I mean, it was just, I was past the point of being disheartened. I was just like, is this like who I am as a person? Like, is this who I am as a human being? And like, is this what I really think about myself? And it was all these things were like all conflicting with each other, trying to fight for who am I as a person? What exactly do I want? And I basically decided I hated Sacred Sons. I hated everything about men's work. I hated everything about the things I'd been doing the last couple of months. I did not want to know anything about fucking trauma. I fucking hated the word trauma. Mm-hmm. I was sick of processing all this stuff. I did not like who I was, what the hell was going on with my life. I had literally also, I didn't even mention this yet, but like a couple weeks before, I just decided to break up with Beth. So I, gave up the most stable thing in my life, which was a 6-year relationship. And through going through all of that, I'm sitting there like I'm at these men's groups, these woo-woo men's groups. I just embarrass myself in a bunch in front of them. I process all this shit. I don't know who I am anymore. I don't understand the reasons I made the decisions I made in my life. And like I'm just like trying to like take it on all at once, and it's like information overload, and my brain is just like literally short-circuiting. And so I go back to my room. I'm like, I'm going to go back to my room. I'm going to get an Uber. I'm going to go home, and I'm never going to talk to any of these people ever again. I don't want to see them again. I don't want to hear another word about men's work ever again. I don't want to speak to another one of these guys. Even I was considering not speaking to John ever again. I was just like, I don't want anything to do with anybody. What the hell have I done to my life? Like, I just don't, like, I got to get out of here. I go back to my room. I order the Uber, and we were deep in the desert. So it was going to take like forever.
Like 7 hours to get to you.
Long story short, I had ordered it, and I was sitting there, and I just remember like sitting under the blankets, crying, and I remembered listening to this Tony Robbins book, or reading this Tony Robbins book, not listening. Awaken the Giant Within, highly recommend. And in this book, he very much clearly helps you to understand that happiness is a choice. Misery is a choice. Anything you do in life, what you focus on and what you think about is what you become, and what will eventually result in your life. And I realized, like, after hearing myself out loud and hearing what my true thoughts were about myself my entire life, was that I had literally consciously been choosing to be miserable and depressed my entire life. This was a conscious decision. And it took having literally my screws getting knocked loose for me to see this. And I remember sitting there and waiting for the Uber. And I was like, all right, I have a choice. I can go home, continue with my life in bliss and misery and be depressed forever and ever. Or I can make a conscious decision right now to try to be happy and to make a change. And I sat there for a while. I journaled. I wrote everything down that what had just experienced me. I go back and I read it sometimes when I'm feeling depressed. I wanted to hear the horrible things I said to myself. I'm not going to read it for you guys because I'm too embarrassed to read that. Because I wanted to go back and realize how dark of a place I was. Mm-hmm. And, you know, at that point I was like I was having some suicidal thoughts. Nothing like suicide is nothing to joke about in any way, shape, or form. I've never had like suicidal thoughts before, but I definitely was having them at this moment. And, I basically made a decision. I'm going to go back out and I'm going to try to receive some of the love from the guys that wanted to give me some of the love out there, or just go see what was going to happen. So I went out. One of my buddies, he led a cacao ceremony. We did a cacao ceremony. And then afterwards, every guy that I came in contact with just came up to me and just literally had nothing but kind things to say. They were like, Joe, we just saw you as being brave. We didn't see you really as breaking your boundaries that much. Like, we just saw you as, I could never do that I wouldn't do that on my own. And we're so proud of you that you didn't back down. And you gave me so much medicine and showing me how I break, commitments in my life. Like this was a moment of like when I was watching my best friend in the first event, I was providing, from my reflection, so much healing for so many of the men that were watching me.
Yeah.
And I couldn't see that. All I could see is my selfish, one perspective, subjective view. And not one person had anything negative to say to me. Even the guy that I broke my commitments to, he came up to me. He's like, I really appreciate you punching me in the face and going 100%. Like, thank you for blooding me up. I really appreciate you doing that because no one's ever done that for me before. And it's like, even though I broke my commitments to him, he appreciated that I stood up to him 100% as a man. And like, that's like a whole nother level of respect, right? But like, man, there was just so many realizations from that fight. And for me, it was like almost like mentally an all-time low. But getting punched in the face was the medicine that I needed. Could take that quote and wear a T-shirt about it.
Yeah, Joe, whenever you need to get punched in the face, just let me know.
I just know I'm going to punch back.
Yeah. So you didn't even know that you were helping others heal during this process?
No. Yeah. I had a lot of medicine for others because, I'm, like I said before, I have no problem stepping into my power. And, have such a big ego. I was never going to back down. Even if they had a 6'5" guy step in to like fight me, I was going to fucking fight him because I have that much of pride in myself where I didn't want to back down in front of everybody. So I was going to step up to no matter what happened. And some might call that bravery. Some might call that stupidity. All I know is it was exactly the right thing that needed to be done at the right moment for that event. And even the guy afterwards that did step in to fight me, God bless that man, because he gave me exactly what I needed. I had to go apologize to him because I hated him. I actually wanted to like hurt him like in a bad way after the fight because I felt like he came in there to teach me a lesson. And his reflection was, dude, I just was so excited to jump in the fight and fight in front of everybody just because it was so cool. He's like, I have nothing against you. He didn't even know who I was. And he just literally wanted to participate. And he's like, I'm sorry if he apologized. I'm like, dude, don't apologize. You gave me exactly what I needed. And it was exactly the punch in the face that I needed. And I appreciate you doing that because I don't think I would have reached the point of what I needed to reach before he did that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Getting punched in the nose will teach you a lot.
I think it's shedding blood. Just a tiny bit of blood will teach you a lot.
Yeah, Joe, just don't cheap shot people after the fight's over.
Dude, I totally was an ass. I'm well aware I was an ass. And that also, another reflection was to show that your trauma is your trauma. I was bullied a lot when I was a kid because I was this little tiny 5 foot, like I was very little.
You're still 5 foot.
I'm still 5 foot. But like, imagine shorter than this and tinier than this. I was bullied a lot and I was being a bully. And I literally was bullying after I had been bullied for so long. And, you know, that's another reflection just to show, don't become what you've suffered, or, you know, and that was a lot, and that was very heavy for me. Yeah. So yeah, that was my last major process was that one at the leadership training.
So are you like a leader now, or you have to do more training?
There's 3 levels. I guess there's LT1, LT2, and then you become like one of the prime leaders and stuff like that. So I have not committed to doing anything else. I'm kind of burnt out on men's work right now, and we'll talk about that when I get to like the last Convergence when we talk about it. But I do want to talk about Frank and his experience at his EMX. So I know like shortly after this, I think I convinced you to go to one of these. And yeah, what was your experience like?
I chose to go to it.
Yeah.
No convincing.
You didn't convince him, Joe.
I retract my statement. I'm much more proud about this moment.
Yeah, so once again, going into the embodied masculine experience is what I experienced down in Chula Vista, San Diego, which is beautiful, by the way. Yeah, walking in, same thing. Like, you just have no idea what you're going to expect. You watch the videos, you go through all this, and it was a 3-day experience. I was with a friend. We shared a tent that was way too small for us. We're both rather large, and this little 3-person tent was more like a half-person tent by the time we were in there, and it rained for a couple of days straight, so it was like 40 degrees at night. The tent was leaking on us. You get a little drip in your face all night long.
Oh, my gosh.
So it's like the full mental torture was there for this trip. But for me, like I think I'm like a very like mental and physically strong person. So like I also knew that like I needed to fully commit to this, because without like getting broken down like physically for myself, it's hard to get into the mental aspect. So that's what's so unique about my experience as well, is just you wake up every day at sunrise. This is and you stop the healing, if you will, the medicine from 7 a.m. till 10 p.m. There's no phones. It's 100% present. You're going on strenuous hikes. You're doing all these physical activities, and like, there's nothing more draining from like your energy level than just being present and listening to someone for hours. And like, if you actually have that dedication, like, it breaks you down so much. So like, my experience was healing through others for the longest time, and every time I got to the moment where I thought I was going to have this big process, because, you know, you're in these circles, you see all these other people, and they have these, you know, can't share that's their own stories to tell, but they have these big processes, and you're like, you know, you go there for this reason. You want some type of healing or some type of deep knowledge like come through. But like, every time that I felt like I was getting to the cusp of it, it was very strange. Another person would step into the center circle, and he would actually say, oh, hey, I didn't get to say goodbye to a loved one. And then you watch this person process, and they reenact the situation and everything. And when you're in those moments and you're sitting there and like you can feel all of this, it's just like day after day of this. Like, it was 2 days straight of every time I thought I was about to have this great process and step into the circle, it wasn't my time. All of this stuff is just like spur of the moment. Like, you're not, as more you think about it, like, oh, hey, maybe this height today when I do this, I really like the rocks. Maybe today is when I'm going to have my process, you know?
Yeah.
And you're hoping for this thing to try to come through, if you will. But it's just unique how it happens every time that I felt like I was about to step into the light. Someone else would step into the light almost for me, and like healing through others, because I've always been alone and like kind of like always fighting for myself. So to have someone else like step in and like go through that like damage part with them was probably like the most healing thing I've ever done. And the fact of healing through others and just being present and being seen for the first time in a long time, like, that's something profound, and everybody should experience just being seen for once in their life. So yeah, you have.
Yeah, I want to comment real quick. It's so interesting that you say that, because I remembered the first event waiting to like step in to have my process. And what I'll say is that it just happens when it happens, and you'll know when's the right moment. And a lot of times it's not even you stepping in, it's being like called in, or like somebody else seeing that you're having a process, and then people come around you. And what I'll say too is, for anybody out there who's listening and is like, oh, you know what, I'm going to be able to do this for myself, or that it'll just should happen on my own. It's like, it's going to happen in the right set of circumstances when you have that emotional response, and just let it happen naturally. I don't think you can force these things to happen. And the Sacred Sons provide a very specific, safe space for it to happen more naturally. And I think that's why it happens more often than not and pretty regularly at their events. Because in my opinion, I just don't remember feeling as safe as I do in a lot of the containers with these men in my normal everyday life, right? There's like certain things I want to talk about this because I think it's important so you can understand. Like one of the things I use is something called, it's a word called chaos, right? So the first thing is they talk about is like confidentiality, right? So anytime we're in a group, everybody agrees that everything that is said should be kept confidential. That's why I'm only sharing my story and the stories that I've been given permission to share. It's because when you're in those containers, it's supposed to be very private, so you can share whatever comes to. Honesty is what H is. So it means being completely honest. This is not a place to lie. And for me, that resonated big time on the first event that I went to, because I was always speaking from a place that I felt was not very honest and forthcoming. The next one is acceptance and non-judgment. Don't judge other people. Know that every experience is subjective, right? If somebody went through a racist experience, you might have never experienced that. If somebody was molested, you might have never experienced that. If somebody's parents were violent, you might have experienced that, but accept everything that's being brought forward. O is own your own shit. So that goes with the I statements. Do not speak for others. Do not assume that you know what others are saying. And do not try and speak for other human beings. And then S for sacred. Keeping it sacred means basically when we're at these events, no sexuality, like no masturbation, no sex with other guys. Like we're not there for that purpose. We're keeping it sacred and you're keeping it sovereign, and really you should be focusing on yourself instead of thinking of sexuality or porn or whatever it may be. And so those are the ground rules that they say at every beginning of every Sacred Sons event. And with those ground rules, it provides a safe space for men to come and to be able to drop their stuff in an effective manner. And so I'll let you continue, but this is why a lot of guys keep waiting for their moment, because they're in a place where the moment could happen at any time, and when it happens, it happens.
Yep, 100% agree. The sacred thing's important too, I think, because it's like, also like your word is, the sacred part. That's why they call it sacred combat. Like you make this, whatever you enter with, you walked into the arena, if you will, the combat arena, you say exactly what you're doing. You're supposed to keep your word and everything. So I think that's, something very interesting as well.
Yeah. So let's talk about your process. What happened for you?
So, once again, kind of where I first got my voice when I was younger was in the football arena. I kind of that stage, that pedestal, and that's where I always felt the most comfortable. So going through all this kind of stuff, and it just happened to be like, I think it was the second or third days when we were doing, every day was different for which group you're in. There's like 100 people or something like that at this event. So everyone is a little different. So ours was day 3. We're all physically exhausted. Early morning is when we did like our small group sacred combat, and then like the championship fight, if you will, was later on in the night. So my process actually happened in what they called the battle dome. It's like this kind of jungle gym looking octagon thing. You're in the middle on this sacred combat ground, and going through all this kind of stuff. And you start on to, the sacred combat, and you're just warming up, if you will, and you're getting into some like the wrestling and the sparring, and then you pick out like one of your brothers that you're going to train with the entire day. So we're going through all this, and once again, like I always in the sports and stuff like that, I needed like the physical breakdown in order to like get to like that emotional vulnerability. So it just happened in the battle arena. After I got pushed by one of my brothers, his name was Amsta, was his name. That guy I never met before, but for whatever reason, the day that he didn't even know he needed either, that he's never been into the fighting situation and he's never really fought in his life, but larger, very masculine dude, muscular, very fast and athletic. So we get into the arena and whatnot, and I didn't know I still had like, because I used to enjoy, like the combat aspect or like even like getting into regular fights and stuff, but it's something I buried and kind of like shamed for a while, like after I got out of when I used to work security when I was younger. It's like a normal thing for me. And then after that, I was like, oh, this is kind of a shameful. So I used to bury that. But this was the first time where I felt like I was back in the arena and like felt like myself again. Because for a long time, I felt like I was like living in a shell of myself for a little bit.
Yeah.
And like this was the first time, once again, like you're surrounded by 30, 40 people and you're just being seen for who you truly are and whatnot. And it's just this 5 minutes of exhilarating sacred combat. We both went 100% because that's where we felt we needed to on both ends. And then afterwards, I just remember, like, we continue on the sacred combat for another, like, 10, 20 minutes afterwards, and we're all like, you get into the circle right before you're about to leave the battle dome, and you do what you call the check-in. And I just remember, like, feeling this emotion. We kind of talked about earlier, like this little boy crying inside, we call the inner boy, and just screaming and like just wanting to finally have a voice for the first time. So then, and the leader at the time, he kind of saw something in me. He said, "Hey, he's like, is anything present? Like, what's going on? Or why are you tearing up a little bit?" I finally, for the first time in 29 years, realized like where all of like a lot of my trauma came from, and it was the abandonment by my mother when I was young. And it took 29 years getting into a 3-day wilderness trek, fighting all these guys, and getting into the sacred combat aspect in order to finally have this realization. But it's that same thing afterwards. You just have like this crazy rush of like realization, and that, oh wow, this is what has been the issue. It's just like this light shined upon it. It's like something truly like profound, and like I can't even put in the words like when you actually feel something like that. So one of the leaders said, "Okay, we're gonna do something." So it's like, what do you feel you need? And I was always kind of more of a quiet individual when I was younger. Like same thing, like I didn't want to stand out in the crowd or whatnot. I didn't, especially like singing or yelling or just expressing like raw emotions and whatnot. It never was really a thing. And I was like, oh, I just feel like I need to stream. So everybody's around you, and you're in the middle of this, battle dome, they called it. And I'm just sitting and like kind of like in a child's pose position, just grabbing this soil. And just out of nowhere, you just feel like this rush. And I just start screaming at the top of my lungs. It was like the first time I'd done it in probably like 10 years of just yelling for the first time. And shaking and just kind of yelling. And then the leader comes back up. He's like, all right, what's present? Like, what do you need, And I just told him, I was like, well, I finally realized, like, the abandonment when I was young is what's created a lot of these traumas. And in the moment, like, I just told him, I was like, I was, like, always alone. And he was like, I always had this, like, felt like a presence of, like, this ancient warrior is what I always referred to. Like, someone was always watching me, but no one ever actually stepped up and, like, came out and got me. So I was like, I need, like, someone to, like, finally find the little boy that's hiding in the woods right now in the tree and needs to be seen for the first time and, like, accepted and loved and, like, finally being good enough. So that's what they did. We took this little boxing glove and we embodied that as my younger 5-year-old self. We put it, like, high up in the battle dome, and I had to go there as my new version of myself, as, the ancient warrior that's finally woken up, stepped into his, like, full primal self. Stepped up, grabbed little Frankie, that was my nickname when I was young, grabbed little Frankie out of the tree, held his hand, and took him over to another leader that looked like an ancient Mayan warrior. He's all tatted up. He very intimidating looking dude, the nicest guy you'll ever meet, but he looks like he was like an ancient Mayan warrior is the best way to describe it. I was like, hey, this is who I need you to embody for me right now. So I took that person over there, and then they had this similar thing, the breakout experience, where they took these 3 large dudes. Actually, I think there was 5 because I was larger than all of them. But there's like 3 people in front and then 2 people behind them, and they lined me up like a half yard away from them. Like, all right, you have to break through all these people in order to get it. And I remember sitting there thinking, oh, this is so stupid. Like, I got to break through these guys. Like, I did this my entire life, like, kind of thing. And it just seemed like a drill, or seemed like going back to the football background. But in the moment when they said, hey, this is your final breakthrough, and like you need to go save little Frankie and, like, go re-in-touch yourself with, like, this ancient warrior, like this, like I was explaining earlier, that life or death situation, you could just feel this rush of emotions come through. And when I actually, you line up, ran through the guys pretty easily, but just getting through there and, like, getting that, like, just you're in this pure rage, like, mode, if you will, and you just break through because it's life or death at this moment. You break through, and I fell into this grown-ass man's hands as you come through, and I just remember we were sitting there, like, hugging and met in this present. I'm literally just crying on this dude's shoulder, like, not, you go from raging, trying to break through this line, and then out of nowhere, there's just this flood of, like, emotions come through, and I'm literally holding on to this dude, and you're just sitting there crying, and we both start breaking down crying, and, like, for once, and then, like, we formed a circle afterwards to process all that. But it's just these processes you go through, it's very hard to explain, but they're, like, something so powerful and profound. We get through there, and then all the guys are, standing around, they all put a hand on my shoulder and they say, "Hey, we see you, we love you." And then like they also made me like repeat out loud, like, "Hey, you love I love myself. I am good enough, and I am worthy." So I had to keep repeating that. And for the first time, I just remember crying and like and looking around. There's 30 people touching you at this moment. Very intense. You're just looking around this circle of all these massive dudes, and you're looking everybody into the eye, and you see all these dudes crying and stuff. I'm like, oh wow, like this actually triggered something in other people too. And like that was the first time I was like, wow, I actually feel at home, because I traveled a lot and like never had a place I felt like I fit in. 29 years later, I finally felt at home, since like I was back to like my grandma's couch watching the cooking show. Like this was the first time I felt at home. And later on, the interesting thing was the guy that I called out to embody he's a leader, that called out to be my ancient warrior. He's actually was going through one of the biggest struggles in his life with his identity. He has a couple kids and all that kind of stuff, and he's older and has a family and everything, but he's been feeling he's been a leader for a while, but he had the same thing. He's been questioning himself. He's like, am I this warrior? Because he had this ancestral type dream where he was surrounded by his ancestors and they were looking down on him, and he didn't feel he was worthy, and he didn't felt like he had that warrior trait that he always knew he had. And he's like, that day, because we both started crying. I didn't know why he was crying when I came out. I was like, oh, why is he crying with me? And he's like, hey, you finally gave me the validation that I needed in my entire life. And he's in his 40s by this process. And like just that alone was like, I was like, wow, this is real medicine, to watch another man cry over something you went through as well.
Do you think it just all sounds ridiculous, or does it all sound like good, or is it something
Mostly ridiculous, but no, I mean it sounds good. It sounds like, therapy, right? But like a group span therapy that you're doing and going through together. And I feel like some of the things that you guys are describing, like breaking through like lines of people to get to, whatever the end goal is like psychologically like you breaking through in your mind as well, which I think obviously is having a huge impact. It's very interesting. It's a lot to take in, especially, we've recorded this like several weeks ago, and it's hard because like the emotions that people are feeling, I guess for me it's hard to connect because I wasn't there, but it's very intense that like and I guess like lightly in real life, like here when I don't mean like real life, but I mean like here, like I've felt like, you ever feel like you pull someone's energy, like or like someone comes in and they change the energy of a room. But I feel like that's what you guys are doing, but like on a level 10, on the next level, where it's like, hey, this energy that I don't know what trauma you've experienced is being passed through you and going through someone else, and that's crazy. So but it doesn't sound crazy to me, like it doesn't sound like you guys are out of this world or you're like a cult or anything. But it sounds like it's very helpful, and obviously it's working, because you're not talking about 20, 30 people, you're talking about hundreds of people go to this every single year. And sounds great. Can I say one more thing too?
Go for it.
The other thing too that I've just been trying to wrap my head around, because it's not only like you're in these groups, but you're so vulnerable, and you're putting yourself out there in front of everyone. Like, I mean, people can't even talk to their friends, to their family, but you're like in front of a bunch of strangers you've never met before, probably. And you're putting your feelings and your emotions and your personal life out there, which is like, I mean, that takes a lot of courage and bravery to do in the first place. And just overall, just hearing these stories, like I can't even imagine what it feels like to be in that situation.
Yeah. When you say that, it makes me sad. Because after going to like one of these events, I was like, why can't I talk to my friends about this? Right? Like, why can't I call James and Frank and just go into this like deep stuff? But you're right. I think a lot of it has to do with like what I described earlier. It's they're just providing the right space and the safe space. Because I think too, like if I talked to some of our friends about this, they'd make fun of me.
Yeah.
They would laugh at my traumas. And I think that's because you remember like one of the podcasts we were recording, we were laughing about the Molotov cocktails.
Yeah.
It's fucking funny, but it's not funny, but like, I don't know if that's preconditioning from our society, which it probably is, right? As you look deeper into it, but
yeah.
we don't provide enough safe space for anyone to come and drop their traumas. And I think that we make fun of it. I think that we don't give it the credit it deserves. I think that we try to rank the traumas. So somebody maybe who was beat by their mom, if somebody else, has been molested, we'll say, oh, well, you're beating by your mom, doesn't matter. But from what I've like read, like studies show that like children going through trauma have the same emotional response as men who go home with PTSD from war. It's just how did it affect you at that moment, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, it is brave to share those things with complete strangers, because most of those events, I was talking to complete strangers about things I've never told any of you about, and you've been my best friend for 15 years now.
Yeah.
And that's scary. That it's not scary, it's beautiful that they've provided a space where you can do that with complete strangers. Yeah. Did you guys do Sweat Lodge at your event?
One of the more intense things I've ever done. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cacao was the leader for that one as well.
Yeah. So let's talk about Sweat Lodge. Sweat Lodge is a very ancestral, let me use that word, indigenous thing where essentially you go into a sweat lodge. It's a structure made out of wood branches with cloth, and typically they'd use branches, I believe, in the past, but they create a closed space where air cannot escape, and then they cut a hole in the ground, and they bring in large stones that have been literally burning for hours, like lava hot, and they put them in the center, and then one person who is leading the sweat lodge will then pour water over the stones, and as he does so, it creates steam, which causes you to sweat in this very close space, where I'm talking like close as in you're almost sitting on top of the other men in there, like 30 men in this very tiny space. And it gets hotter. I don't have a good analogy. What is a funny analogy about hot?
It's hotter than the devil's anus.
That's probably on point. Hotter than the devil's anus. And it gets really, really hot in there, and you sweat. And as this is like similar to like the boxing and the fighting, like as you get rid of the physical aspect of what you're thinking, your emotions start flooding through. And from what I understand of these pours is like each one is for a different level of like you and your generations. The first pour is for I think the children, right? It's for like the babies and the children in the next generation. The next pour is for for you, right? It's for you, and then it's for your parents, and then it's for your ancestors. And I apologize if I mess that up. I just know it's like 4 levels of generations. And each time that there's a pour, it gets hotter and hotter. And during these pours, one of the leaders will be singing. And a lot of people, when they go into these, it's almost like you're entering the mother's womb. And I think that's what it's supposed to signify, is you're entering essentially the mother's womb. And as you exit it, you're reborn out of the mother's womb. And I know for me, I've done now several sweat lodges with Kale. And for me, in Maui, when I went into my sweat lodge, what happened in there was that I had to let go of teenage Joe. What I essentially learned by like going through my processes in Maui was that I had basically been stuck in this phase of rebelling teenager for like 19 years. and that I was just this still angry little kid. I was mad. I was partying every weekend because I was never allowed to party. I was just trying to be friends with everybody because I was just literally stuck in this phase of my life. And so when we got to the pour for ourselves, it was very heavy for me because I had to essentially let that kid die. And for me, it was very heavy because that kid carried me through 19 years of my life. That rebelling, pain in the ass teenager that was pissed off at everybody, was angry, was not expressing himself, was not listening to his intuition, that was always talking negatively about himself. I had to let that kid die. And I just remember crying and like weeping in there, letting him go. And it was literally like feeling a part of my body as the sweat and everything just dripped off. Like it was like almost like, you know, when you decay and you're just like then giving nutrients to the earth. And I was just letting all that go. And I can say at 34 years old is the first time in my life I've ever felt like an adult. I never felt like an adult before then. And I remember just always, I was like, oh, you're an adult. And I'm like, I don't really feel like an adult. I feel like I'm still a kid. And that was a very powerful experience for me. And yeah, man, Sweat Lodge is very powerful. If you have the opportunity to go, I recommend to you to be brave and to stay inside the whole time.
How many rounds did you guys go through?
We did 4.
4 rounds?
Yeah, 4 rounds. And the reason I say this is I realized on my last Sweat Lodge that I did at the last Convergence I went to, which was a year later, I was very judgy. I personally feel that Sweat Lodge is a very sacred experience and that you should stay through the whole thing, especially if you decide to go in, no matter how hot it gets. It's out of respect to the other men, out of respect to the energy that's being held in there. It's hot. Obviously, it's hot, but it's a sacred thing, and you should treat it sacredly, and you should stick through it. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's a sacred, like, ancestral thing, like, you know, when, like, Kale, he describes it and whatnot. Like, it's, you know, you're almost disgracing, like, you're coming there and you're putting your energy and effort. And just to describe the room a little bit, it's like 12 feet by 12 feet, and there's 30 people in there touching elbow to elbow, and it is pitch black. Every time a stoop goes on there, it's like 3 or 4 stoops per round.
Yeah.
And then they bring in a new stone every round to intensify the heat.
Yeah.
After every time. And if you're making the commitment to be there, if you don't see it through, they offer after round 2, I think, hey, does anybody want to exit?
Yeah.
And if you make the commitment, it's also like one of these like huge like mental boosts for you as well. If you can make it all 4 rounds without leaving, getting water or doing anything, it's like you way of like thanking the ancestors for all the sacrifice that they've also went through.
Yeah, 100%. Dude, I remember my last Sweat Lodge. It made me realize I still have a lot of work to do. I am extremely fucking judgmental. I kept judging every dude that got out. I'm like, what the hell is wrong with this guy? Why can't you just sit still, sit through the whole entire thing? And then I kept judging our leader because I'm like, who is this guy allowing people to leave? And then I got super pissed off at him. I'm like, what the fuck? Like this guy. And I was super mad actually because our leader was not Kale, it was somebody else. And I just remember judging him because I'm like, I had all these expectations and I realized like I'm a year after all this stuff and I feel like I've come a long way, but I realize I'm extremely judgy. When my expectations are not met, I'm a brat. And what I also realized too is the way I judge him is the way I judge myself. Right? A lot of times the way that you're acting negative towards someone is a reflection of you. And so I told somebody afterwards how I felt and how I was judging people. And he just looks at me, he's like, bro, this is just you judging yourself. This is why you act like this. This is probably how you treat yourself. And he wasn't wrong. And so the Sweat Lodge will teach you something every time you go in there. And the heat always has something to teach you, but very powerful experience.
Yeah. And when you finally come out of like if you want to use the mother's womb terminology, that first cold breeze that comes through there, it literally feels like life again. Because there's some moments when the steam gets so intense, like when you can't take deep breaths. If you take too deep a breath, it's like fire going down your lungs. Yeah. You want to talk about a real man. Kale, you know, this is a 3-day event. Every day he's doing 1 to 2 of those. Like I got out of there, I'm dehydrated, I'm tired, and like I'm full on like, all right, I need a cold shower. Like this is like, you feel amazing afterwards, but it's one of those like very mentally tough things. I'm like, I looked at there, I'm like, man, he's done 2 of these a day for 3 days in a row. I was like, you want to talk about mental toughness? I was like, go look at that guy.
Dude, God bless that man. Yeah. And Yeah, and what I will say too is like, for those of you that don't pray or think about your ancestors, I know when I've been in these sweat lodges, I just feel like the presence of them, and they are there, they are watching over, and it's just important to realize that you came from a generation of people that loved and supported you, and even in the afterlife, they love and they support you. And I would say try to connect with your ancestors because you have a heritage. We live in a cultureless culture, but you came from somewhere. Your family was somewhere. Even if you had parents that didn't teach you your culture, or you didn't have parents that teach you your history, you can take it upon yourself to go learn those things. And it is our job to teach our generations and to lead them and to create a culture. And as a term that they use in Sacred Sons, it's like we are creating our ancient future, right? It's like if we don't teach those things and we don't bring those things to our children, no one will, because we do live in a culture where almost our heritage is pushed away. It's not cool to do cultural things. It's not cool to learn your history. It's not cool to stick with the things your grandparents taught you. But the truth is, those are the things that got you to where you are today, and it's important for us to remember them or else they'll be forgotten.
100%.
Yeah. The other things I guess I want to share is, I was part of the 33 group. It was very special to me. And what I will say is after doing all this men's work and going to all these events, every time I go to one of these events, I get called out by other things. And what I'll say is if you're a man and you see another man doing something wrong, you call that man out. And you tell that man, hey, you should not be doing this, because it is our responsibility to call each other out and to hold each other responsible for the things we do in life. And I know for me, every time I go to these events, I keep getting called out on something that I thought I had healed from, something that I had fixed. And I've learned that processing trauma and growing as a man is a lifelong journey. It is not something that will ever be finished. And it is something that I would always like to be called out by other men so that I can continue to grow and learn. And as for cold plunging, I guess I could just show a video. I just want to show one. And we talked about it on the last one, and I just kind of want to be done with this. But we went to Utah for one of the events, which was super cool. Utah, it was... Oh, man. Yeah. So,
Inspiration by Joe.
yeah. But it was just beautiful, just complete snow where we went. It was freezing. And we decided to do some cold plunges in the morning. And this is me doing a cold plunge. And I remember now what the breathing was when we were listening to the recording. That was me breathing. But as you can see on the top here, the top of the tub literally froze over. Ricky had just done a cold plunge, but you see it was frozen. So talk about like the coldest that you can do. So I get in this thing, and man, talk about something that will make you instantly present in a moment. There's nothing like a cold plunge. Also, you'll feel more awake than you've ever felt in your entire life before. And I know that there's so many health benefits to doing cold plunges. And I know now I take cold showers usually when I get in, just for like the first minute, and then I'll turn it warm. But it's also something I paid attention to is like, you can almost like feel when you shower in warm water, you feel your energy seeping out. And the moment you put it to cold, your body like closes up like the pores and like holds the energy in. For any of you interested in cold plunges, do some research on it. Wim Hof is obviously the master. I'm still getting into it more and more. I'm actually looking to maybe get a cold plunge at my place, but I've done several of them. Every single Sacred Sons event I've been to, there's always been a cold plunge opportunity, and I highly recommend that if this is something that interests you, take a look into it. It has so many benefits.
Yep, they're amazing. Was this your first one?
This was not my first time I ever done it, but this is the coldest cold plunge I've ever done, by far. Yeah, it was nice out in the cold, out in the snow. The water had been freezing overnight, so nice and chilly. But yeah, it was great. And yeah, on that note, I do want to just give one shout out to my ex. I want to thank her for carrying me through a lot of this depression and a lot of my problems. And to all the women out there that hold space and support men out there. And the thing about women is, like, in my experience, like, just remember your relationship should stay sacred. It should stay sexy. It should stay romantic. And if your man is dumping on you and changing the dynamics of your relationship from being, your wife or girlfriend to being a best friend or being another, like, I would say, for lack of a better word, man in his life, that you should talk to him and maybe give him a suggestion that he should find some men in his life to hold support, because men are the ones that should be holding each other up. We are the ones that are strong. We're the ones that should be supporting each other through everything. And it's up to us to go back to our heritage, go back to, for lack of a better term, re-indigenization, and help each other get back to the core of what it is to be a man. And we thank all the women out there. We appreciate you. We love you. We wouldn't be here without you, literally, figuratively, metaphorically. And yeah, we appreciate you listening in. And I hope that the messages we've shared over the last couple of podcasts resonate with anyone. And like I said at the first podcast we recorded earlier today, I did have a friend who killed himself yesterday. And if you're in a position like that, reach out for help. Call me. I'll talk to you. Obviously, seek professional help, but there is love and there is support out there if you look for it. Sacred Sons could be it. There could be other groups out there, but taking your life should never be the answer. There's always another option. There's always support that you can find, even when it seems like it's darkest and there's no hope and there's no light in your life. Take a moment to realize that there is, and you just need to look for it.